Chapter 694. Lu Chen was in a trance for a moment. It was as if he had returned to more than 10 years ago, when he had witnessed that shocking change in the desolate valley. Although it had been many years, the strange and huge eye that had appeared in the sky at that time was still clearly in front of his eyes and had never faded from his mind. He knew that compared to the owner or some kind of power that the eye represented, he was as insignificant as an ant. He also knew that on that day, perhaps that I didn't notice him at all, but at the end of that clamorous change, it was he who unexpectedly made a move and ended everything. He had used the black sword to kill Yun Shouyang, thereby disrupting the god-subduing mantra formation, and then caused the elders of the devil cult and the fire shaman of the barbarian tribe, who were receiving that godlike power, to be smashed to pieces by the chaotic and violent power. Before they died, they had miraculously broken through the limits of the human race, forcibly raising their cultivation from the ordinary Yuanying realm to the realm of deity transformation perfected monarch, and perhaps even stronger. Such a powerful and unimaginable power was not something that a human could achieve. Lu Chen had a clear understanding of this, and as the only person who had survived the strange change and the collapse of the god-subduing mantra, he had always kept his mouth shut about this power and had never mentioned it to anyone else. He had not even mentioned it to perfected Lord Tianlan, who had a special relationship with him, or his old friend Old Ma, who had accompanied him for many years. If he had told Old Ma about this, it would have been a disaster for him, but if he had told perfected Lord Tianlan about this terrifying power, Lu Chen knew that the damn Baldy would definitely pursue it. For someone like perfected Lord Tianlan, who had already stood at the peak of the human race and was even more powerful than the elders of the devil cult and the fire shaman, it was impossible for him to resist such a temptation. It was like a person who had walked a very, very long distance and had left behind everyone in the world. There was only darkness and confusion in front of him, and all that was left was loneliness. If a small path or a patch of light suddenly appeared at this time, the result would be self-evident. However, Lu Chen raised his head and looked at the huge vortex in the sky with a bitter smile on his face. After so many years, everything seemed to have returned to its original point. The secret that he had kept should have disappeared from the world, but now it reappeared again, and it happened to be in the hands of Supreme Tianlan. He stealthily took 2 steps back, completely hiding himself behind Supreme Tianlan. Although the attention of the 2 divine transformation stage perfected monarchs was focused on perfected monarch Tianlan, the aura of the 2 divine transformation stage perfected monarchs still exerted a lot of pressure on Lu Chen, who had yet to reach this level. In comparison, perfected Lord Tianlan's burly body was like a wall. When Lu Chen stood behind him, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief. That heavy pressure was immediately blocked by more than half. His gaze swept across Supreme Tianlan's broad back, and once again he felt that this scene was very familiar. In the air, the branch that had fused with the divine tree's leaf shone brightly. Its aura was boundless, and it exuded an aura of boundless vitality. It also attracted a particularly dense beam of light from the blood moon in the sky, causing a change in the weather and the appearance of that huge vortex. All of this was extremely similar to the god-subduing mantra formation in the past. However, after observing for a while, Lu Chen gradually realized that something was wrong, or rather, it was not enough. The vortex in the sky was boundless and terrifying, but up until now, it was still spinning without directly opening a crack in the sky like it did in the past, revealing that mysterious eye. Lu Chen could even clearly sense a strand of terrifying energy faintly flowing in the sky. It was howling and tearing, yet it was unable to break through that invisible boundary. He pressed his hand lightly on his chest and looked expressionlessly at the branch in the air, thinking, it seems that in the end, this branch's leaf is still inferior to that seed. Even he could tell that the few perfected lords of the soul formation realm on the other side were also able to see through some of the subtleties in the situation. The slightly nervous expressions of perfected Lord Tiehu and perfected Lord Guangbo relaxed. That mysterious perfected Lord Guyu still did not show up outside, but it seemed that she did not have the intention of making a move. Perfected Lord Tiehu smiled and said to perfected Lord Ton, "Himan, why do you still use this kind of evil art? Do you really want to do something with those inexplicable things of the devil cult?" Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed a little surprised and frowned slightly. He had probably expected that the two treasures of the devil cult, the branch and the leaf of the divine tree, would be enough to activate and open the crack in the sky. However, for some reason, the power of these two treasures seemed to be greatly reduced, and he actually felt that his efforts were in vain. Just a little bit more, but he still could not achieve his goal. For the first time, his face became serious and solemn. He carefully looked at the branch and leaf in the air for a moment, as if he was thinking about something. Standing behind him, Lu Chen smiled bitterly. In this world, he was probably the only one who knew why the branch of the divine tree would suddenly have an accident at this critical moment. It was because it did not have enough power. Of course, it was because a part of the essence of the branch had been absorbed by the seed in his body. Just when Lu Chen began to nervously think about the current situation, the two perfected lords of the divine transformation realm opposite him refused to let go of this great opportunity. After greeting each other, Perfected Lord Tiehu and Perfected Lord Guangbo slowly walked forward, sandwiching Perfected Lord Tianlan from two directions. Not to mention that behind Perfected Lord Tianlan, there was another master of Starry Hall hidden somewhere in the empty city. We have been planning for a long time just to trap you when you leave the base of Sky Dragon Mountain and are alone. Perfected Lord Tiehu said calmly, for this reason, we have already made thorough preparations. You have no chance to escape. Perfected Lord Guangbo sneered and said, seeing that we have known each other for many years, I will give up resisting and spare your life. As long as you live underground for 100 years, we will let bygones be bygones. As they spoke, the two of them had already walked half of the way and were getting closer to Perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen. Perfected Lord Tianlan snapped out of his thoughts and glanced at them. There was no fear or nervousness on his face. Instead, there was some disdain in his eyes as he looked at them indifferently. Just the two of you trash? Useless things. He was probably the only person in the world who dared to call two perfected lords of the divine transformation realm useless things. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not pay attention to the two opponents who suddenly changed their expressions. He reached into his arms again and a green light suddenly scattered. At this moment, the expressions of everyone present, including Lu Chen's, had changed. Their faces were filled with disbelief, and astonishment. The third fragment. He actually had a third fragment of the devil cult. Chapter 695. In fact, the Tree of God had never appeared in the world. Or, at least since the beginning of human history, there had never been any mention of the Tree of God in the divine central continent. All the information about the Tree of God only existed in legends and myths, and only in the legends of the devil cult. In fact, after a long time, even in the devil cult, the legend of the Tree of God had been on the decline for many years. After all, it was just an illusory myth that was of no help to the reality. After years of forceful suppression by Xianxia and Meng, the devil cult struggled to hold on, and most people's impression of the Tree of God was just an ancient legend. As for whether it was true or not many people actually cared. Lu Chen had lurked in the devil cult for many years and knew the mentality of the people in the devil cult very well. The more ordinary a member was, the less they cared about the legend of the Tree of God. On the contrary, the few bigwigs and elders who stood at the top of the devil cult attached great importance to the legend. And it turned out that there was a reason for this. The fragments left behind by the Tree of God did possess incredible power. The battle in the Barren Valley many years ago and the Blood Moon catastrophe led by Perfected Lord Tianlan today all seemed to prove this point. The fragments of the Tree of God were the most important treasures and artifacts of the devil cult, but over the years, they had gradually been lost in the outside world by chance. Even though Lu Chen had secretly obtained the seed of the Tree of God, the most important of the fragments, he had never really imagined that he could have all the other fragments. Until today. He saw with his own eyes that Perfected Lord Tianlan magically and bizarrely took out the fragments of the divine tree one after another as if he was performing a magic trick. When the third fragment, another leaf that was full of vitality and was glowing with a green light, appeared in his hand in front of everyone's eyes, even Lu Chen, who was always calm, could not help but be dumbfounded. This damn baldy, this crazy lunatic, this peerless genius. Is there anything he can't do? How many more secrets are hidden in him? When perfected Lord Tianlan took out a second leaf from his pocket, Lu Chen's expression changed drastically, and the expressions of the two perfected lords of the divine transformation stage opposite them also became very interesting. Supreme Guangbo was shocked at first, then he was speechless. Although they were enemies now, Supreme Guangbo couldn't help but say, Old man Tianlan, when did you rob the lair of the devil cult? You actually have so many fragments, really? He seemed to be at a loss for words for a moment. After a pause, he shook his head and said with a bitter smile, You have been fighting with the evil cult for the past few decades. Now it seems that all the foundation of the evil cult has been seized by you. Supreme Guangbo grinned at Supreme Guangbo. His expression was very gentle, but he didn't say anything and looked non-committal. As they were talking, a sudden heavy panting sound came from the side. Both of them and Lu Chen were slightly surprised. They turned their heads together and saw that Supreme Tiehu was standing on the other side. At this moment, his face was green and white, his beard and hair were standing on end, and he was gnashing his teeth in anger. At the same time, his expression was mixed with a bit of shame, pain, horror, and regret. Even his body was slightly trembling, and it seemed that he was extremely angry. Boom! A loud sound suddenly rang out. It was Supreme Tiehu, who seemed to finally be unable to control the fury in his heart. He suddenly hit the nearby wall with his palm. Instantly, the wall cracked, and then a large section of it collapsed with a loud bang, causing dust to fly everywhere. A chilly wind carrying dust blew past the old man, fluttering his clothes and white hair. Supreme Tiehu clenched his teeth and spat out 2 words from between his teeth, Bitch! After being ravaged by Supreme Tiehu's sudden outburst of temper, the already damaged courtyard became even more messy. The few people present seemed to be shocked by this old Tiehu's sudden loss of composure. For a moment, no one spoke, and everyone stared at Supreme Tiehu. The atmosphere suddenly quieted down, and it was somewhat stiff and cold. Supreme Tiehu sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't seem to care. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Supreme Guang Tianlan. His eyes looked like they were about to spit fire, and he fiercely scolded Supreme Guang Tianlan, despicable and shameless. At this point, no one present was stupid. In the blink of an eye, they all understood. Although Supreme Tiehu clenched his teeth and only scolded without saying the reason, it was obvious that he had suffered a great loss from Supreme Guang Tianlan. Needless to say, this seemingly strange private matter was obviously related to the second leaf of the Tree of God that Supreme Guang Tianlan had just taken out. This was because Supreme Tiehu looked calm when he took out the first 2 pieces of the Tree of God. It was only when he took out the third leaf that he flew into a rage like an old dog whose nest had been broken into. Supreme Guangbo obviously thought of this as well. After the shock on his face faded, he frowned and walked a few steps towards Supreme Tiehu. With a gloomy expression, he asked in a deep voice, Brother Tiehu, what happened? Supreme Tiehu wanted to say something but stopped. His expression was ugly, and he finally snorted. He flicked his sleeves and said coldly, Nothing. It would be weird if nothing happened. Everyone here was as shrewd as ghosts. Who could be fooled by such a crude lie? Supreme Guangbo looked more and more worried. He shook his head and said, Tell me clearly, Brother Tiehu. If there is anything that will affect our big event today, you can't hide it. After that, he turned to look at the city outside and said in a clear voice, Brother Guyu, what do you think? In the depths of the seemingly empty house, behind a few beams of light, there was a vague silhouette of a person flitting past and disappearing like a ghost. After a while, a voice said, I think what Brother Guangbo said makes sense. Supreme Guangbo nodded and looked sideways at Supreme Tiehu. Supreme Tiehu's expression became more and more ugly. He even clenched his fists subconsciously. However, he still had some rationality left. After taking a few deep breaths, he gritted his teeth and pointed at Supreme Tianlan with a cold face. I didn't expect that my adopted daughter, Wenji, was also a shadow that this bastard had arranged. As soon as he said this, there was a sudden silence. Everyone's expression was interesting and strange. Those who could stand here were all well-informed people in Xianxia. They had more or less heard some news that ordinary people didn't know. The adopted daughter of the old perfected lord, that charming young woman, had a great reputation in the perfected immortal alliance. As for the real situation after becoming famous, everyone knew it in their hearts. They saw through it but didn't say it out loud to save each other some face. However, if Song Wenji was actually Zheng Xianmeng's shadow, the meaning of the matter would be completely different. At this moment, Supreme Tiehu's expression suddenly turned cold. He stopped and cried out, "Oh no, on the mountain." Chapter 696. At this moment, Mount Heavenly Dragon was covered in a blood-red and gloomy scene. Most of it was because the blood moon in the sky had already covered the sky and covered the entire mountain range in a dark red and gloomy color. In addition, the fierce fighting and internal strife that broke out in Xianxia also added some thick blood to this doomsday-like disaster. The three major forces, Heavenly Law Hall, Deziyuan and Starry Hall, showed their strong foundation and strength. They formed an alliance and attacked the territory of Fuyunji from three different directions. There was no doubt that this was the largest and most intense internal strife in the thousands of years since the establishment of Xianxia. From the beginning of the battle, blood was seen, and then both sides quickly became red-eyed and began to kill. To be honest, although Xianxia was famous in the world, and in the eyes of most people in the world, it was a famous sect that presided over righteousness and protected the common people. But in fact, this organization was really not a compassionate, kind, and weak place. From the very beginning, the founders of the Alliance of True Immortals were the few most powerful and influential big shots in the world. To put it bluntly, the purpose of establishing this organization was to better occupy and plunder heavenly treasures and earthly cultivation resources. Later, they found that this thing was unexpectedly useful. Not only could they occupy the moral high ground and attack their enemies in the name of righteousness, but they could also rule the world more easily. As for the cultivation resources that were fought over at the beginning, it was simply not a problem. After all, the whole world was under the rule of this huge organization. Those resources could not be snatched as they wanted and used as they wanted. Someone was not convinced? Then beat him until he was convinced. Still not convinced after being beaten? Then directly beat him to death. The dead always had to be convinced. How many years had passed? Under the iron fists of the true immortal alliance, countless heroes had fallen or knelt down. Then, everyone washed their names in the open and in the dark, easily becoming the leader of the righteous path. It really couldn't be any better. Any intelligent person in the world would be able to see that this was a good thing that had both potential and prestige. Who wouldn't be envious? Who wouldn't want to come and have a share of this kind of life? Therefore, for so many years, Xianxia had never been truly peaceful. There were always twists and turns, and there were always disturbances. The old perfected sovereigns of the divine transformation realm refused to step down from their positions no matter what. The young and ambitious ones tried their best to climb up the ranks. Unless someone like perfected Lord Tianlan, who was exceedingly powerful, jumped out and stood out, it would be very difficult for most of the rest. Very difficult, extremely difficult. However, ambition would not be restrained because of difficulties. Ambition would only go crazy because of the beauty that was close at hand. Then, it would burn one's heart and soul like a burning flame. In this way, in the history of Xianxia, there had always been internal strife and secret fights. Blood and death had always been with this huge, bright organization. It was said that a long time ago, when Xianxia was founded, an ancient devil had cast a curse on it, cursing it to sink into the sea of blood forever, never to rise again. Until today, this curse looked like it was going to come true. The Floating Clouds unit was currently the most powerful unit in the True Immortal Union. This was a publicly acknowledged fact for the past 20 years. Even though the other three great powers had attacked them together today, and it seemed like every single one of them had concealed their true strength, all of them possessed even more powerful strength than what they had displayed in the past. However, although Fuyunji was fighting 1 against 3, although they were shocked, they did not panic. Layer after layer of resistance, they fought and retreated. Gradually, they managed to block this terrifying attack. Then, after they stood firm, near their core area, near the main hall of Fuyunji actually began to show signs of a counterattack. Compared to the other three forces that attacked, it seemed that Fuyunji had also hidden their strength. Their true elites had been hiding in the shadows, as if they were preparing for this battle. Therefore, even though it was 1 against 3, the current battle was gradually being equalized by Fuyunji. Fuyunji blocked the attacks of Heavenly Law Hall, Deziyuan, and Starry Hall, and then quickly began to counterattack. In this fierce civil war, the situation was very bloody and cruel from the beginning. Obviously, many people who were in the same Xianxia usually saw each other frequently and would nod and smile when they met. At this time, they all pulled out their swords, roared with red eyes, and used the most vicious means to kill each other. Blood flowed all over the ground, converging into a river from the top of the mountain, flowing everywhere. They were all the elites of Xianxia, but now they all seemed to be worthless pawns, constantly killing each other. Sometimes, people even forgot why they were fighting and only had a kind of instinct left, which was to kill with red eyes, because only by risking their lives could they survive in this chaotic and particularly cruel internal strife. The blood moon hung high in the sky, and the blood-red moonlight shone on the top of the mountain, silently watching this human killing. Behind the crazy people who were killing like madmen, in the blood that flowed all over the ground, there was a trace of colorless and odorless aura being extracted from the dark red blood, silently drifting into the sky, and converging towards the blood moon. A bloody aura was exuded in the moonlight, and everyone seemed particularly excited. Then, at a certain moment in the development of the battle, an unexpected change suddenly occurred. In the battlefield that was still fiercely fighting, in the roar of killing that shook the sky, among the three attacking forces, for some reason, the Deziyuan's group felt more and more pressure as they fought. And if one looked at the overall situation from a high place, one could see the changes in this battle. The people of Starry Hall were the slowest from the beginning, and their attack speed was the slowest. Now, after fighting for a while, they gradually retreated, while the people of Heavenly Law Hall were originally determined to fight, but for some reason, as if they suddenly received a strange order in the command, the whole group suddenly became chaotic. After a while, some people in the Hall of Heavenly Law stood dumbstruck on the spot. Some people were still fighting the people of the Fuyun Agency with bloodshot eyes. However, at least half of the troops suddenly turned around and charged towards the troops of the Great Chancellor with strange expressions on their faces. There was no doubt that this was a heavy blow. The Deziyuan's team was suddenly in chaos. Some people shouted angrily, some people scolded angrily, but what greeted them were sharp blades stained with blood. The people of Fuyunji were also stunned, and seemed to be confused for a while. Many people not only did not hit them when they were down, but also subconsciously retreated for a distance, and then turned back to look for their own commander, wanting to figure out what was going on. Then, the people of Fuyunji quickly found another very bad situation. The person who was in charge of the overall situation on Fuyunji's side, unknowingly disappeared. Everyone was like a headless fly, fighting and killing in this bloody battlefield. No one knew why. There were only ant-like lives left, but in the bloody battlefield, they collided and killed, as if under the blood moon, this doomsday catastrophe was a sacrifice. Blood was still flowing, and the blood moon in the sky was getting redder and redder. Chapter 697. The construction of Fuyunji's main hall was actually not very long ago. At least compared to the famous halls of Heavenly Law Hall, Deziyuan, Starry Hall, and other old forces of Xianxia that had been built for hundreds of years, it was still a very young building. From the time it was completely built until now, it had only been a mere few decades. However, although its history was not long and its foundation was not deep, one would not see that everything had a history after entering the main hall, and that every brick and tile had a story. However, from the appearance of the main hall, it could be said that Fuyunji's main hall completely overwhelmed those ancient halls of Mount Tianlong. From the beginning of the construction of this main hall, it had inherited the unruly and insufferably arrogant temperament of the founder of Fuyunji, Lord Tianlan. It was the largest hall on Mount Tianlong and the tallest building in the entire immortal city. It was towering and majestic, and in the past few decades, it had become the most eye-catching place on Mount Tianlong. Lord Tianlong did not seem to understand the principle of the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. For many years, he had always lived unscrupulously, completely ignoring the gazes of others. Then, the fact was that in these past few decades, he had used his own strength to defeat all doubts and all the traps and undercurrents that harbored ill intentions. Until no one dared to challenge him, he became the person who stood at the peak of the world of cultivation. Even his enemies had to admit that this damn Baldy was powerful to this day. And after so many years of ups and downs, Fuyunji's main hall had also gradually gained respect and awe from the initial glances, scorn and ridicule. It had gradually become the symbol of power in this huge organization. This main hall was very grand and huge, with all the side halls and side halls. In fact, it was a huge group of halls. Of course, the most eye-catching and largest one was, of course, the main hall of Fuyunji. However, for the people of the Floating Clouds Agency, this hall was very awe-inspiring. However, there was also a very strange thing. This faction was founded by Supreme Lord Tianlong. This hall was also built under his orders. However, he himself hadn't lived in this place for even a day. True monarch Tianlong had built a smaller Kunlun palace for himself to live in, leaving the Floating Clouds Agency's main hall to Blood Warbler and the other high-ranking elites of the Floating Clouds Agency. It was said that when this decision was made, it was beyond everyone's expectations, but it also won the hearts of his subordinates, causing them to become more and more loyal to this bald true monarch. After all, from the beginning, everyone thought that this would be an unprecedentedly magnificent new divine transformation stage perfected monarch mansion hall, because all the other divine transformation stage perfected monarchs did the same. The Heavenly Law Hall, the Great Chancellor Hall, the Starry Hall, and so on, all of them occupied the core halls of their forces as their living quarters. The dome of Fuyunji Main Hall was very tall, blocking out all light. Therefore, although there were many doors and windows in the surroundings, as long as a few of them were closed, the depths of the main hall would appear darker. At this moment, this was the case in the main hall. Far away from the entrance, when standing in the depths of the main hall, darkness flowed over, blocking out the light from outside. Originally, Old Ma felt that this place was always gloomy and did not like the gloomy atmosphere in the depths of this main hall. However, on this day, he suddenly discovered that the darkness in this main hall was actually a protective barrier, blocking out the extremely dangerous light of the blood moon outside. The other elites of Fuyunji were not here at this moment. Old Ma knew the movements of some of them, but the rest that he did not know should have been arranged by Blood Warbler to defend against the attacks of the other three forces. Right now, they were in a bloody battle. The entire main hall was empty, leaving only Blood Warbler and Old Ma. Blood Warbler stared blankly at the strange moonlight that swept everything outside, her face pale. She suddenly shook her head, turned around, and quickly walked into the depths of the main hall. Old Ma was shocked, and subconsciously followed 2 steps forward, but then a strange expression appeared on his face. He saw Blood Warbler quickly walk to a high platform with a throne in the depths of the main hall. This was a seat that was even higher than the seat she usually sat in. Needless to say, this was originally prepared for true monarch Tianlong, but that bald true monarch had never come here before. Blood Warbler walked straight over, and then stretched out her hand behind the throne, as if pressing some secret mechanism. A moment later, a low rumbling sound suddenly rang out in the main hall. On the side of the throne, a secret underground passage appeared. The square staircase extended downwards, and it seemed to be about the width of 2 people. No one knew where it led to. Old Ma opened his mouth wide, took another step forward, and then stopped again. For a moment, he was a bit hesitant, not knowing if he should follow. Blood Warbler did not hesitate, and walked down the secret passage after it appeared. But when half of her body was in the passage, she suddenly raised her head and glanced in Old Ma's direction. Old Ma stood where he was, stunned and somewhat at a loss as to what to do. Blood Warbler was silent for a moment, and then she beckoned to Old Ma. Old Ma swallowed, and his breathing became a bit rough. He looked back at the distant main hall, and under the blood-red moonlight he could faintly hear the sounds of fierce fighting in the distance. Some were screaming, some were roaring, some were shouting, and some were going crazy. It was like a boiling blood feast. He gritted his teeth, and suddenly took large strides, running towards Blood Warbler and the secret passage. Blood Warbler watched as Old Ma quickly ran to her, and then nodded slightly. Her face still looked very pale, but standing in the secret passage seemed to have helped her recover a bit. At least, there was a bit more color on her face. She no longer hesitated, and directly turned and walked down. Old Ma followed behind her, and after one last look at the empty main hall, he followed Blood Warbler underground with complicated feelings. His eyes first darkened, and then brightened again. Old Ma followed Blood Warbler down the stone steps that were dozens of floors high, and came to a tunnel that extended to both sides. Blood Warbler walked forward, and when she reached the side of the tunnel, she pressed on an inconspicuous brick on the wall. Immediately, a rumbling sound rang out again. Old Ma looked back and saw that the stone slab on the ground of the secret passage had already closed, isolating him from the outside world. The fighting and blood seemed to have gone far away. In this underground world, it seemed that even the blood moon could not affect this place. Blood Warbler glanced at Old Ma, and then said in a low voice, "It's safe here, follow me." After saying that, she walked to the end of the passage on the left. Old Ma followed her obediently, staring at the woman's back. His eyes were full of doubts and an indescribable complexity. Blood Warbler seemed to sense something and said, "Do you have something to say?" Old Ma was silent for a moment and then said, "Yes." Blood Warbler said, "Speak." Old Ma suddenly took 2 quick steps forward and blocked in front of Blood Warbler. He then stared into her eyes and asked in a low voice, word by word, "Why me?" Chapter 698. The blood moon in the sky had changed. Everyone in the underground cave could feel it. Apart from Wuxia, everyone else who could stand here was a divine transformation realm perfected cultivator. They were people who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world. Be it in terms of Tao, cultivation, vision, experience, or even perception, they were all top-notch figures. The changes in the sky naturally did not escape their eyes. The blood moon had changed inside, but it was not because of the pieces of the divine tree that perfected Lord Tianlong had released. When the pieces were put together, they had an imposing manner that attracted the essence of the blood moon in the sky, but it did not have much effect on the blood moon itself. The few divine transformation realm perfected lords could feel it. The other reason for the blood moon to change was another kind of power. Actually, at this moment, when the time to reveal the trump card was approaching, many things were no longer secrets. They were all laid out on the table and could be easily seen. Although the world was covered by the blood-red moonlight and gloomy and suppressed, it also covered many traces of subtle changes. But in the eyes of these divine transformation realm perfected lords, ordinary people could not compare. Not long after, a cold snort was heard. It was true Lord Tiehu who wore a solemn expression and a bit of hatred, while true Lord Guangbo was furious. Pointing at the huge hole above his head, he pointed at the distant sky and the creepy blood moon, spat at true Lord Tianlong and said, "Is this what you did? You let the blood moon absorb the essence of human blood?" He said loudly and angrily, "If you do this, how are you different from those demons of the devil cult?" Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He stole a glance at perfected cultivator Tianlong, only to find that perfected cultivator Tianlong didn't care about perfected cultivator Guangbo's accusation at all, as if he had heard something stupid that wasn't worth refuting. He was so disdainful that he didn't even bother to say anything. He just flicked his fingers slightly, and the last leaf in his hand flew up and landed on that branch. Just like before, this leaf and the other 2 pieces of the divine tree were indeed divine objects of the same origin. After they were gathered together, there was almost no rejection reaction and they directly gathered together. The leaf landed on the branch and fused with it. 2 green leaves, one above and one below, one on the left and one on the right, seemed to have grown on this branch from the very beginning. They trembled slightly in midair and fluttered in the wind. The emerald green leaves emitted an infinite radiance of vitality, making this underground world seem to be filled with greenery. After the tree branch was completed, there seemed to be a sudden clap of thunder in the air. It was as if something had suddenly awakened, opened its eyes from its slumber, and looked over. The blood moon in the sky suddenly pierced through all the obstacles. Even the magic formation on the ground couldn't stop it. It directly descended and landed on the tree branch. The transformation process happened extremely quickly. From the moment perfected Lord Tianlan took out the divine tree fragment to the moment the divine tree branches and leaves took shape, only a short period of time had passed. Furthermore, although perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be doing it casually, in reality, his aura was as deep as an abyss with hidden killing intent. Both Tai Hu and Guangbo were at the level of divine transformation true monarch, so they could feel the terrifying aura of true monarch Tianlan. As long as he got closer, he would definitely be greeted with a storm of attacks. In that short period of time, the situation had become somewhat delicate. Currently, Tai Hu, Guangbo, and Gu Yu were besieging Tianlan. Without a doubt, they had the upper hand. However, Gu Yu was controlling the underground magic formation from the outside. He blocked the blood moon from the outside and trapped Tianlan from the inside, so he couldn't get close to Tianlan. Tai Hu and Guangbo were the main forces attacking perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan had been famous for many years. He was valiant and arrogant. Even among the divine transformation true monarchs, he was still the best. Naturally, Tai Hu and Guangbo were deeply afraid of him. Otherwise, they wouldn't have secretly made this plan to besiege him and eliminate him. At the same time, as divine transformation true monarchs, they naturally wouldn't be too afraid. Even if perfected Lord Tianlan attacked them, they were absolutely confident that they could hold on for a while, regardless of whether they would be at a disadvantage or not. However, the problem was that their teammates were obviously here. Therefore, of course, they should let the others rush up to block the crazy Tianlan's desperate and terrifying counterattack. Then, they could restrain Tianlan from the side. It would save energy and be safe. Moreover, they would also have the opportunity to defeat Tianlan and keep his good reputation in their hands. Even if both of them were injured, it wouldn't be impossible. In other words, deep down in their hearts, this was actually the best result. They were all experienced people. How could they not think of this? Even if they had long planned to do this together, it was hard to say how much trust they had in this temporary teammate. Would he really be able to completely trust them when they went up to block the crazy Tianlan's attack with all their might? It was hard to say whether Tianlan would stab them in the back. At this time, the two perfected cultivators of Huashan realms standing opposite to Tianlan suddenly realized that no matter how well they talked before, no matter how determined they were to swear and analyze, they still couldn't believe each other at the last moment. Perhaps it was because at the level of divine transformation true monarchs, everyone was lonely. They were so high and mighty that they wouldn't believe in anything other than themselves. Therefore, these divine transformation true monarchs remained motionless even though they had the upper hand. They watched helplessly as true monarch Tianlan threw out the branch of the divine tree. Outside the ruined house, in the depths of the empty ruins, a long sigh suddenly sounded out. It was the mysterious Gu Yu true monarch. He still didn't show up, but in that long sigh, there seemed to be a trace of bitterness. There might be lunatics and evildoers present, but no one was a fool. Although the situation was extremely delicate, everyone soon saw through it, including Lu Chen. A slightly sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He shook his head slightly, while the two opposite true monarchs showed a bit of embarrassment on their faces. However, as embarrassed as they were, they didn't say a word or make any movements. After all, in the decades before the rise of Fuyunji, as the representatives of the oldest forces in Zhengxianmeng, the Heavenly Law Hall and the Dezhiyuan, who were now allies, had also fought to the death in the past. That hatred was engraved in their bones, and that fear couldn't be erased. It was the same for divine transformation true monarchs. Everyone knew that the other party actually wanted to kill you, and the key was that they really had the ability to do so. So, who would really be at ease to expose their dangerous weaknesses? They could only stand like this. No matter how powerful a divine transformation true monarch was, at this moment, restrained by the most superficial emotions and couldn't move, even if it made them look like a bit of a joke. True monarch Tianlan glanced at the two contemptuously, then turned back and smiled at Lu Qin. Although he didn't say anything, Lu Qin understood what he meant. This kind of trash can also be as famous as me in the world? So, let's just get rid of him. The bald madman laughed and then stomped his foot, stepping right on the groove in the stone slab beneath his feet. The rumbling sound from the depths of the ground suddenly became louder. Chapter 699. White Lotus had been hiding in the passageway for some time. It was a good position not far from the exit. The light from the outside couldn't shine in, and she could easily see what was happening in the underground cavern city in the distance by hiding in the shadows. It was just a little lonely. That black dog Inatsu, for some reason, suddenly ran out. After running into the streets of the city, the black dog suddenly gave up walking straight along the spacious streets. Instead, it ran left and right into those small alleys, disappearing in the blink of an eye. White Lotus was left alone in the passageway. She was surrounded by a gloomy and depressing environment. She actually didn't feel afraid, but she still felt a little uncomfortable. White Lotus didn't know where this feeling came from, but there was no doubt that she didn't like it. She chose a relatively flat shadowy corner and sat down, pulling her clothes closer. In the center of the city in the distance, a few soul formation perfected lords were facing off. Moreover, it was very obvious that they had used some kind of magical power to cause the blood moon in the sky to change. Although White Lotus couldn't see the outside world from this corner, nor did she see what had happened to the blood moon, she felt her heart suddenly start to beat faster. Thump, 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 thump. The heart in her chest was beating fiercely, squeezing out a stream of dark red blood from her heart and quickly flowing to the rest of her body. White Lotus felt a little cold, but her heart seemed to be ignited by a ball of fire, burning fiercely, making her feel anxious and uneasy. Cold on the outside, warm on the inside. This was a very strange feeling. White Lotus sat down quietly, no longer looking at the situation outside where a few soul formation perfected lords were facing off. Instead, she looked down at her own body and the pair of palms on her knees. She was still a young girl. Her hands were white and soft, her skin was like jade, and her fingers were slender. However, at this moment, her palms were reflected in her eyes. In the center of her palms, there were a few small dark red spots. White Lotus frowned and rubbed her hands a few times. Then she realized that it was useless. These small spots were not ordinary dirt, but something that grew under the skin of the palm, something that grew in the flesh. White Lotus was obviously startled, and her expression became a little gloomy. She sat on the spot and stared at the spots on her palm for a while. Suddenly, she stood up and quietly walked to the edge of the cave, taking the risk of being discovered. After pausing for a moment, she felt that the big shots in the distance did not notice the movement in this small corner. She then took a deep breath, and with some anxiety on her face, she gently stretched out her hand from the stone wall beside the cave. Outside the cave was the huge underground cavern. Because the blood moon had smashed a big hole in the dome, the blood moon's moonlight shone in. However, most of the light was still shining on the city, especially with the few deity transformation stage perfected monarchs at the center. Moonlight would also be refracted from other places, but the light was much weaker. The place where White Lotus was at was the same. There was also moonlight, but the light was not very strong. White Lotus stared at her palm, and then slowly she placed her hand under the light. She opened her palm. The moonlight shone on her palm. It shone on those spots. Then, those dark red spots suddenly seemed to squirm, and actually began to slowly expand. White Lotus retracted her hand with the fastest speed she could muster. Her face was abnormally pale, and her lips were trembling slightly. She looked at her palm again. At this moment, those spots had already doubled in size, and became an ugly, dark red spot. White Lotus slowly retracted her palm, and tightly clenched her teeth. After a while, she looked up at the figures in the light, and her eyes suddenly revealed hatred. She muttered to herself in a low voice, "You all deserve to die." The light of the blood moon fell from the sky, shining on the underground city that had not seen the light of day for a long time. It reflected the figure of a black shadow running through the gaps between the tall houses. Atsu ran all the way here, but the closer it got to the strange circle of light, the more cautious it became. Later, it even began to run and stop, stopping from time to smell, observe for a while, and then continue to move forward. Its direction also seemed very strange. There was clearly a very clear and simple straight path to the courtyard where Lu Chen was, but Atsu had taken a detour from the beginning. It went through the small streets and alleys and made a big turn, but went around to the side, and then carefully approached the house that was shrouded by the light. At the same time, all kinds of lights were still rising and flashing in the city, and the unknown array was still in a state of activation, but at this moment, it seemed to be a little weak, as if it was having some difficulty dealing with the power that was transmitted from the sky. Atsu did not feel much about this. At most it looked at the constantly shaking light beams a few more times, and then continued to approach the circle of light. Every time it passed by a gap with a slightly wider field of vision, it would look in that direction for a while, and when it saw that Lu Chen was still standing in the light, still unharmed, and at least seemed to be fine for the time being, Atsu would seem to heave a sigh of relief, and then it would lower its head and continue to move forward slowly. This world was so difficult, and this moonlight was so dangerous, isolating all life, but only a black dog still persistently moved forward. In the circle of light, Lu Chen seemed to feel something, and suddenly looked back. But in the place where his gaze swept past, outside the broken walls, the streets and alleys of the city were still empty, not a single person could be seen. If there was a shadow, it would probably be that Guyu true monarch. With such a soul formation true monarch guarding outside, probably no one in the world would be able to approach. At the thought of this, Lu Chen sighed in his heart, retracted his gaze, and focused his attention on true monarch Tianlan again. He watched as he stepped down, saw the stone slabs on the ground sparkling, and then felt the ground beneath his feet trembling, shaking, and rumbling, as if a door was slowly opening a gap in the depths of the ground. That door, where did it lead to, and what kind of monster and what kind of world was behind it? For some reason, he suddenly thought of the seed in his heart. In that ancient tree hole, there were also two doors. One led to an incomparably terrifying void world, and the other had not been opened yet. For a moment, Lu Chen suddenly had an urge to open that door. No one knew if they could live past today, and if they did not know what was behind that door before they died, would they feel regret? His gaze fell on true monarch Tianlan's broad back, but his hand slowly moved to his heart and gently pressed on it. Chapter 700. Atsu cautiously approached the house, and cleverly avoided a few of the strange beams of light that came from the ground. Logically speaking, this black dog was unlikely to have any information about the array that was set up here. For it to be able to come so close, it could only be attributed to Atsu's extraordinarily sharp intuition. But under normal circumstances, a dog could hardly be smarter than a person, especially in this huge array, and the person secretly presiding over the array was an unfathomable soul formation perfected lord. Atsu saw that it was only 4 to 5 feet away from the damaged house, but at that moment, in front of Atsu's eyes suddenly darkened. A figure suddenly appeared in front of it, blocking its path and its line of sight. Atsu suddenly looked up and saw a person standing next to a wall. It was Guyu perfected lord. This old man was also looking down at Atsu. His expression was a little subtle, but there was no worry on his face. But when he saw Atsu, there was a little surprise on his face, then he seemed to find it a little funny, and shook his head slightly. "A dog," he muttered to Atsu in a low voice, then repeated, "It's actually a dog." Atsu stared at the person in front of it, and took a step back, but it did not make a move to attack. Although Guyu perfected lord stood in front of it, blocking its path, and at the same time, there was no sharp aura of a weapon on its body. Perhaps, this was the innate sharp intuition of its celestial wolf bloodline? Although Atsu was already very powerful, it was still far from being able to match up to a deity transformation stage perfected monarch. Atsu even lowered its head slightly, showing a somewhat submissive attitude. Guyu perfected lord was slightly surprised, and could not help but take another look at this black dog, and smiled, nodding. I still have some impression. You seem to be the dog that usually follows beside Lu Chen, right? After a pause, Gu Yu's eyes flickered. Are you going to look for Lu Chen? Atsu made a low sound in his throat, as if acknowledging this point. Gu Yu Supreme smiled, and for some reason his gaze became gentler. Taking a step forward, he stretched out his hand to touch Atsu's head. Atsu's body moved visibly, as if it wanted to move or resist. But in the end, it resisted and stood still in the same place. Looking at the black dog, the admiration in Gu Yu Lord's eyes deepened. She gently rubbed Atsu's head and smiled. You beast, you're quite understanding. There's a good show going on over there. It's not appropriate for you to go over now. Just stay here. Gu Yu Supreme patted Atsu with a smile, and then sat down on the ground beside Atsu. She did not seem to mind that the ground was dirty, and only patted the ground beside her and smiled. Come sit, let's watch the show together. No one knew if Atsu understood the meaning of Gu Yu Trueborn's words, but after staring at Gu Yu Trueborn for a while, Atsu turned back to look at Lu Chen. Then, slowly he actually knelt down on his seat, looking especially obedient. Gu Yu Supreme laughed and nodded. Little wolf is smart, your future is limitless. True monarch Gu Yu and black dog Atsu met and were intercepted at a place a distance away from Lu Chen and the others. At this distance, there was a circle of light formed by the formation, and there were many tall houses blocking their line of sight. In addition to true monarch Gu Yu's own methods, no one in that house noticed that there was an additional black dog in the underground cavern. The people in the circle of light, the three demigod lords, and the seemingly irrelevant Lu Chen, were all focused on the new branch of the Tree of God that had already merged with the two leaves of the Tree of God in front of true Lord Tianlan. A gentle green radiance filled with the aura of life was emitted from the strange branch that had just been born, and it surged in all directions like the waves of the sea. At the same time, the blood moon in the sky seemed to be attracted by this branch of the divine tree, and it continuously sprinkled its blood-colored radiance on the ground. Behind the blood moon, the strange and huge whirlpool in the sky continued to spin. At the center of the whirlpool, there was a thick darkness that seemed to be unable to dissipate, and the rumbling of thunder sounded from within, as if something was about to break through the limits of this world. Lu Chen also stared at the branch, and his mind was filled with the scene of the Battle of the Barren Valley years ago, when the demons of the devil cult and the fire shaman burned the seed of the Tree of God, and then activated the God subjugation spell formation, and attracted the otherworldly abnormality. Although the scene and the people were completely different, from the burning thing and the strange phenomenon in the sky, Lu Chen already had a premonition of what he was about to see next. They were eyes that had been engraved in the depths of his memory and had not seen the light of day for a long time. With some contempt in his eyes, perfected Lord Tianlan glanced indifferently at the two experienced divine transformation stage perfected lords of Xianxia, who had been on par with him for decades. Then he suddenly raised his hand, and without any visible movement, the branch of the Tree of God in the air suddenly fell directly into his hand. Almost at the moment when he reached for the branch of the Tree of God, perfected Lord Tiehu and perfected Lord Guangbo suddenly seemed to wake up from their original state of doubt and hesitation. After looking at each other, they suddenly flew over from the left and right, forming a pincer attack. Without even looking at the two of them, perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly reached out and grabbed the branch of the divine tree. The two dark green leaves on the branch trembled, looking a little dangerous, as if they could fall off the branch at any time. However, perfected Lord Tianlan clearly did not care about this at all. After grabbing the branch of the Tree of God, he directly chopped down at perfected Lord Tiehu with the branch without hesitation. This scene actually looked a little funny, because whether it was the branch of the Tree of God or the leaves, these treasures and divine weapons of the devil cult actually looked very petite and had a somewhat weak appearance. Who would believe that a branch could kill someone? However, at the moment when the branch of the Tree of God swept across, the sound of the wind seemed to suddenly disappear. A dark green light swept across, and then a black crack suddenly appeared in midair. It was a sudden darkness, as if a hole that led to a strange world had suddenly opened, and the darkness inside was about to gush out. This dark crack blocked perfected Lord Tiehu's path. Perfected Lord Tiehu suddenly let out a long roar and his body flipped back, but he seemed to be very afraid of this crack. At the same time, Perfected Lord Tianlan flipped his other hand and hit Perfected Lord Guangbo, who was rushing over from the other side. Their bodies shook violently, and then they immediately separated. Rumble, rumble, rumble. A loud sound suddenly came from under Perfected Lord Tianlan's feet, as if there was a violent life that had waited for too long and finally could not wait any longer, and roared toward the sky. Then, the ground under their feet began to tremble violently, and the ground cracked continuously in all directions. Chapter 701. The sound of footsteps echoed in the tunnel. The dark tunnel in front of them continued to extend forward. At the same time, they could feel that they were slowly sinking, as if they were going deep underground. The tunnel was very quiet. All the chaos and noise of the outside world was isolated outside. It was hard to believe that at this moment, outside of this tunnel, Mount Celestial Dragon, including the entire immortal city, was immersed in a gloomy and mournful light of the blood moon. It was like the end of the world. Just like that, Shui Ying and Old Ma suddenly walked towards an unknown underground place, as if they had nothing to do with it. Why me? Old Ma's question rang out again. Shui Ying still did not stop, nor did she answer. It was as if she did not hear him at all. Old Ma followed this woman for a while. Seeing that she was still acting as if nothing had happened, he could not bear it anymore. He quickly ran in front of Shui Ying and reached out to stop her. He stared at Shui Ying and said, "Hallmaster, can you explain to me clearly? Otherwise, I won't be able to leave with you." His action could be said to be quite rude and bold. For so many years, Shui Ying had ruled over Fuyunji. She was a revered woman in Xianxia. Other than those old demigod true monarchs, almost no one dared to speak to her with such an attitude. Shui Ying herself seemed to be a little surprised by Old Ma's attitude. However, she was more surprised than angry. Perhaps she knew what was going on. She just stared at the old horse with a strange look in her eyes. Old Ma felt a little guilty under her gaze. He subconsciously withdrew his hand that was blocking in front of her and laughed dryly. He still wanted to explain to Shui Ying, but Shui Ying had already said, "Do you want to live or die?" "Of course I want to live," Old Ma answered without hesitation. However, this answer clearly did not satisfy him. He looked at Shui Ying and said in a low voice, "Hallmaster, I don't know what you want to do now, but I do know that what you're doing now is not funny. You abandoned your brothers who are fighting outside and hid here. Even if we are lucky enough to survive, if Lord True Monarch investigates, how are we going to explain all this to him, perfected immortal?" Shui Ying suddenly interrupted Old Ma's words. She looked at Old Ma with a complicated gaze and a strange expression. There was a hint of pain in her eyes as she said softly, "How much longer do you want to deceive yourself? When has Lord Perfected Monarch ever cared about us?" Her originally pale face suddenly flushed red, as if she was excited. Instead, it added a bit of worldly beauty to her originally cold temperament. She pointed at the passage behind her and said to Old Ma, since the beginning of this battle, how long has it been since you last saw our Lord Jinjuan? Do you know what he's doing right now?" At such a critical juncture, when people were bleeding and risking their lives for him, why was he not here? Where is he? This series of questions suddenly smashed into Old Ma's face, making Old Ma a little confused for a moment. After a while, Old Ma came to his senses. His expression changed in shock, and he looked at Shui Ying as if he was looking at someone he didn't know. "Are you crazy?" Old Ma murmured. "Crazy what?" Shui Ying took a deep breath and said, "I've just had enough. I don't want to be that kind of cloth that will be thrown away after using it. I want to walk a different path that I've thought of." The muscles on Old Ma's face fiercely twisted, as if he had heard the most inconceivable words. He looked at Shui Ying and after a long while, said in shock, You want to rebel?" Shui Ying sneered, then shook her head and said, "No, I'm not rebelling against him. I've followed True Monarch Tianlan for dozens of years. No one in the world knows this person's temperament and methods better than me. If I want to rebel against him, I definitely won't be able to defeat him. But even if I want to find a backer, who can I find? Old Ma thought for a moment, then asked tentatively, the other few demigod true monarchs on the mountain right now? Just a bunch of old trash. Shui Ying snorted disdainfully. It seemed that after throwing away her disguise, she actually looked down on the other demigod true monarchs in the Immortal Alliance. If those people want to fight with true monarch Tianlan, even if they join forces, I don't think they can win. Old Ma was speechless. The moment she opened her mouth, she directly looked down on the other demigod true monarchs. There was really no one in the world who could be her backer. Shui Ying said again, the situation has developed to this point. I can basically be sure that our Lord True Monarch doesn't plan to care about our lives anymore. Old Ma was shocked and said, how can this be? This is Fuyunji, it's his life's work. Bullshit. Shui Ying seemed to suddenly become irritable, or perhaps she was provoked by something. She completely threw away her reserved and polite appearance and cursed in an unusually rude manner. Old Ma was frightened by her. Today, Shui Ying's behavior was completely different from usual. It was as if she had suddenly become a different person, which gave Old Ma a strange feeling. He was thinking nervously in his heart, and at the same time he sized up this charming woman in front of him again. When his gaze swept across Shui Ying's face, that woman's face, which originally did not have any abnormalities, suddenly caused his gaze to freeze for a moment. He stared at Shui Ying and found that in Shui Ying's eyes, there were two blood-red shadow marks that were slowly appearing and continuously expanding. It seemed that half of her eyes had already turned blood-red, and the other half looked like it was about to be devoured very soon. However, Shui Ying did not seem to feel much about this. She only said bitterly, we treat him as a god, but he treats us as grass. When we can be used, he uses us, and when we can't, he throws us away. I have risked my life for him and worked like an ox or horse for dozens of years, but today he actually doesn't even want to see me. What have I been doing all these years for? At the end of her words, her voice had already gradually become mournful and bitter. Her words reverberated in this tunnel, echoing like the cries of ghosts. Old Ma took a deep breath. His palms trembled slightly, but he quickly clenched his fists and firmly restrained himself. He looked at Shui Ying, and his expression became gentle, in stark contrast to Shui Ying's increasingly agitated expression. He even took a step forward and revealed a small smile, saying, what you said is very true, it is indeed so. Shui Ying panted, and her expression eased slightly as she looked at Old Ma. Old Ma took another step forward and said softly, but I still want to ask one more question. Shui Ying grunted and said, go ahead and ask. Before she could finish the word ask, her voice suddenly became hoarse. Her face suddenly paled and she lowered her head to look. She did not know when a sharp blade had appeared in one of Old Ma's hands, and he directly stabbed it into her lower abdomen. Chapter 702. Shui Ying grabbed the blade in her abdomen. Her body trembled slightly as anger and disbelief flashed through her eyes. She stared at Old Ma and said in a hoarse voice, Are you crazy? Old Ma shook his head and said with a frown, I'm not crazy. You're the one who's crazy. I just don't want to die in your hands in vain. Shui Ying laughed bitterly. For some reason, the blood-red color in her eyes became even more intense, as if they were congested. She gritted her teeth and said while gasping for breath, I clearly saved you and didn't let you die outside. How dare you repay my kindness with enmity? Forget it. Old Ma felt a wave of irritation in his heart for no reason. It was as if there was a tidal wave pounding against his heart, causing him to breathe rapidly. He could not help but feel flustered and depressed. He swallowed his saliva and sneered, I asked you for a long time why you didn't choose anyone else and only chose me to follow you here. But you didn't say a word. And don't think that I can't see that in this blood moon catastrophe, there are already people who have been invaded by the invisible evil energy and are becoming more and more crazy. His eyes flashed as he looked in the direction of where he came from. In that place, there seemed to be a sudden gust of wind blowing past, blowing through the passage, blowing through the secret door, and blowing through the grand but dark Fuyunji Hall. Outside the door, deafening sounds of fighting suddenly surged like a tide. A sea of blood covered the sky and covered the earth. The blood moon hung high in the sky, and the blood on the ground flowed like a river. Countless Xianxia's elite troops gathered in the vast territory outside the Fuyunji Hall, madly killing each other. Perhaps they were old friends, or perhaps they were allies. But on this day, all these feelings turned into dust and dissipated among the flesh and blood. Everyone howled and screamed. Their eyes were bloodshot as they ran in the light of the blood moon, desperately killing each other. Even most of them had forgotten their so-called standpoint and faction. They were only relying on their instincts to continue this naked slaughter. He was like a berserk beast that had lost all reason. In the air, within the rivers of blood, strands of strange aura were constantly extracted from the pools of blood and gathered towards the blood moon in the sky. At the same time, it made the world seem even more bloody and cruel. The illusion flashed by and old Ma's body trembled. His gaze once again landed on Shui Ying's face. For some reason, his face looked somewhat ferocious. He gritted his teeth and stared at the woman, growling, "Do you dare to say that if we continue, you won't kill me to silence me and then run away by yourself?" Shuang looked at old Ma, the muscles on her face twitching slightly. She did not know if it was because of the pain in her abdomen or some other reason. She twisted her body, as if she wanted to take a step back. However, old Ma's hand, which had not loosened its grip on the hilt, suddenly tightened again. The sharp blade in Shui Ying's abdomen suddenly twisted. Then, there were a few muffled sounds, as if it had suddenly activated some extremely evil mechanism. Shui Ying's body suddenly shook and all the blood drained from her face. Her body immediately went limp and fell down. When the blade was pulled out of her body, it could be seen that the shape of the thing had changed. All kinds of sharp teeth crisscrossed each other, and what was even more frightening was that it was still spinning, bringing with it a fountain of fresh blood. Shui Ying's wound was so horrifying that one could not look directly at it. One could also faintly see that the inside of the woman's abdomen had been completely destroyed. It was out of shape and it was hair-raising. The heavily injured Shui Ying covered her abdomen with both hands. Blood dyed her hands red in the blink of an eye. However, she was still alive. Her face was pale as she looked up at the strange object in old Ma's hand. Then she sighed and said in a low voice, "Heart-shattering blade? This kind of evil object that even the evil cult's own people are not too willing to take. You actually stole it." Old Ma seemed to be very nervous. There was sweat on his forehead. He kept swallowing his saliva and gasping for breath. At the same time, he looked very angry. He roared at Shui Ying and said, "Bah, you think it's evil just because you say it is? In the past, you were high up and had countless resources. You didn't have to personally fight the evil cult's demons. Of course, you didn't care about these messy things. But what do I have? If I didn't get something to protect myself, I would have died long ago." A strange smile suddenly appeared on Shui Ying's pale face. She looked at old Ma and said, "This thing is a great evil object. Every owner who took it died very miserably. Looks like I don't have to worry about no one taking revenge for me." "Bullshit," old Ma scolded angrily. "Nonsense. Lu Chen told me long ago that the things in the evil cult are not good or evil. It only depends on who uses them." He gripped the strange blade tightly and said loudly, "I just want to live." Shui Ying shook her head. She seemed to have exhausted all her strength. She didn't want to say anything more to old Ma. She slowly leaned against the ground. Her chest was still slightly moving up and down, but her eyes were already slowly closing. Old Ma stared at Shui Ying for a while. Seeing that she was completely motionless, his eyes showed some panic. He panted and pressed his hand against his chest. He could only feel his heart beating violently, as if it was about to jump out. He felt a little dizzy. He shook his head hard. Then he decided to leave this place. Leave this strange tunnel with a strange origin. He returned to the Fuyunji Great Hall. Chapter 703. In one's life, it was almost impossible for anyone to live completely clear, There would always be many puzzling and incomprehensible things that would leave you at a loss and at a loss. Even if it was a person with an incomparably strong will and a person with a clear goal in his heart, it was often the same. Who could see through a person's heart? A strong person might hide a sensitive and fragile heart under the hard outer shell, but everyone would carefully hide their own weakness. This was human instinct. We always preferred to face the world with a sharp edge and hide the softness deep in our hearts. This principle was not complicated, not profound, but many people in the world did not understand, or it could be said that some people had the wisdom to understand this principle, but often they could not see themselves clearly. No matter how high your cultivation was, how strong your will was, it was impossible to really be willing to cut yourself open like a knife. Everything is the world's fault. I am the innocent one. I was forced. I am the victim. Such an excuse is so easy. Lu Chen often thought like this. In fact, in retrospect, this kind of thinking was also a kind of spiritual defense, allowing him to have a little respite in the dark years. Otherwise, during those 10 years of lurking in the evil sect, even if his body could still hold on, his spirit would have long collapsed. Self-analysis was really a very difficult and very painful thing. If it was really so, Lu Chen had once quietly reflected like this, but looking back, he quickly found that the first thing he had to face was the blood that stained his hands during those 10 years. For the so-called righteousness and ultimate goal, and also to win the trust of those evil sect demons, the lives that he personally killed were not only evil sect demons. These things he never talked about. Probably old Ma and Tianlong Jinjuan knew a little about it, but both of them seemed to have coincidentally forgotten about these things. No one mentioned it, as if everyone had really forgotten about it. Lu Chen also thought that he had really forgotten about it. Until today, when the doomsday catastrophe was gradually taking shape, at the moment when life and death were uncertain, he was like an idle person watching from the side. He suddenly remembered those things in the past. It turned out that he had never forgotten about those vengeful spirits and blood. The shadow was also a human. His mind flashed with those blurry and clear faces, but in the end, it stopped at the last moment before he entered the darkness. There seemed to be a face that he could never forget. It kept churning in his mind, but it was always a distance away from him and he could not get close to it. He raised his head and looked at the sky. The blood moon was faint, and a ray of moonlight shone down, causing his eyes to suddenly turn red. Then, a ball of black flames burned. Lu Chen's body suddenly trembled. At that moment, the mist suddenly dissipated. The black flames and the blood moon intertwined, causing that face, after so many years, to finally appear clearly in front of him. Lu Chen saw her, that woman, the woman who had promised to spend the rest of his life with him. The darkness rose and fell like waves, slowly surging over. He seemed to have returned to that night outside the desolate valley. He saw that familiar black-robed version of himself, holding a black sword as he stumbled forward. Then, Yun Xiaoqing's figure appeared in front of him. She stopped him. She seemed to be saying something to him. Lu Chen's pupils suddenly dilated, and his body trembled slightly. He saw that black-robed man suddenly hug that woman, and then he stabbed the black sword into her chest. The strange phenomenon in the sky was already becoming more and more intense, and the ground under his feet kept rumbling, as if some terrifying monster was about to break free. The sky changed color, and the scene was chaotic. Even people like soul formation perfected monarchs were paying full attention to this side of the world. No one cared that in that little pavilion, there was an insignificant person standing there. Even though his eyes were already burning with black flames. Lu Chen felt as if his heart had been stabbed by a knife, and there was a deep chill. But very quickly, after the anger at those people and things that were hidden from him, Lu Chen suddenly realized another fact. That was, other than anger and regret, he actually did not have any other emotions. He originally thought that he would go crazy and fly into a rage, but he did not. He realized that he was like a person who had become numb to his bones and had lost all emotions. Those dust-covered past events only stimulated him for a while, but they could no longer make him as excited as when he was young. Had the years turned him into a walking corpse? People should not live like this. The world was gray, and his heart was numb and desolate. Until one moment he suddenly remembered that in this world, there was still a woman. Although she was distant from him, she was like a ray of light that had once illuminated him. How long had it been since he last thought of Xianxia? Perhaps, that young girl also did not like this bloody and crazy world. She preferred a sunny and beautiful life. She would definitely hate this world created by a madman. Then, would you be willing to live in such a world? Boom! The earth finally could not withstand the strong underground pressure, and dozens of large and small holes instantly collapsed within a few thousand feet. The shrill ghost howls were instantly deafening. They flew into the air at the same time, and then looked down. They saw that in the depths of the ground, an extraordinarily huge magic formation was slowly appearing. In the center of the magic formation, there was flowing light, as if a small sun had gathered and condensed into a ball of light, emitting a brilliant radiance. But under the ball of light, a spiral-shaped door of darkness was slowly opening. The ball of light emitted strong rays and shone on the door of darkness, as if it was fighting against the power of the darkness. But everything seemed to be too late, and the ball of light was getting more and more strenuous, and it seemed that it would not be able to hold on for much longer. Immortal Tiehu and Immortal Guangbo, who were in the air, suddenly seemed to understand something. They looked at Immortal Tianlan and roared, "Are you crazy?" Immortal Tianlan's expression was calm, and even his eyes were very gentle. He did not seem to be crazy at all. Perhaps, in his eyes, the one who was crazy was not himself, but the world. He waved his sleeves suavely, and it seemed that he did not even want to talk to these people anymore. Instead, he took a deep breath, and his body suddenly shone with a golden light. A ball of flame suddenly surged out from his hand, and the tree branch of the tree of God was burned. Green light shot up into the sky in the flames. In the farthest depths of the whirlpool in the sky, there was a sudden clap of thunder, as if some god had finally found the direction and opened his eyes. In the deepest darkness, a bolt of lightning tore through the sky, and then an eye slowly opened. Chapter 704. Of course, Lu Chen also saw the terrifying eye that appeared in the huge dark vortex in the sky. At that moment, he had completely cast aside all his doubts and finally confirmed that all this was just a ridiculous reincarnation. The huge eye that spanned across the sky, the cold and emotionless eyes that overlooked all living beings, and the invincible aura that seemed to be able to destroy everything, were exactly the same as the scene that appeared in the barren valley years ago. He still clearly remembered the feeling when he stood in the magic formation of the god-subduing spell and looked up at the sky, and the feeling of staring at that terrifying eye. So many years had passed, but that creepy feeling had never subsided. He could only bury it deep in his heart and not think about it. Until today, it resurfaced again. It couldn't be wrong, it couldn't be wrong. This was the extraterrestrial evil god that the devil cult and the fire shaman of the barbarian tribe jointly summoned in the battle of the barren valley years ago. Many questions that puzzled him were answered at this moment. The various arrangements in this underground cave always gave him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. The aura when the magic formation was activated also reminded him of the secret method of the devil cult's god-subduing spell. It turned out that these were all the same thing. However, why was this happening? Lu Chen looked at the three deity transformation realm perfected cultivators and saw that among them, Tai who perfected cultivator and Guangbo perfected cultivator were both shocked and angry. Obviously, they didn't expect that such an unexpected scene would happen in this underground cave, a trap that they had meticulously set up so that they could besiege perfected cultivator Tianlan and finally control the power of Xianxia. Lu Chen even faintly saw a trace of fear in the eyes of the two deity transformation realm perfected cultivators, which was something that would never appear in normal times. As the most powerful figures in the vast land of the divine land, Tai Hu and Guangbo should not have such emotions. They should not be afraid of any power in the world. But today, facing the sky above and the mysterious hell below, the two terrifying forces that did not belong to this world simultaneously appeared here. As deity transformation realm perfected cultivators, their instinctive and keen senses allowed them to feel the terrifying aura of these two forces had the ability to destroy them. Those who had cultivated to the level of soul formation perfected monarch were probably the most afraid of death in the world. Usually, nothing could threaten them. The perfected monarchs of the divine transformation realm were used to the feeling of being high and mighty. They thought of themselves as gods, but now, their faces were pale and their eyes were filled with fear. The only one who was different from them was, of course, perfected Lord Tianlan. Lu Chen was the closest to perfected Lord Tianlan and could see him the clearest. Therefore, he could tell with a single glance that perfected Lord Tianlan's condition was clearly different from the others. His expression had remained calm from the very beginning. Even though the sky was falling and the earth was shattering, the giant eye above him and the demonic ghost below him, these two powers that surpassed this world had appeared, his expression did not change at all. There was a strange feeling in Lu Chen's heart. He stared closely at perfected Lord Tianlan and suddenly remembered the reactions of the third elder of the devil cult and the fire shaman of the barbarian tribe during the Battle of the Desolate Valley. When they operated the god subjugation spell formation and the terrifying giant eye in the sky appeared, the third elder of the devil cult and the fire shaman of the barbarian tribe fell into a state of extreme excitement and madness at almost the same time. It was as if they had longed for this power for many years to the point of insanity. In fact, this was the case. The power that descended from the sky directly poured into the four of them through the spell formation and forcibly increased their cultivation in an unimaginable way. They broke through an unimaginable boundary and reached the deity transformation realm, and there was still no sign of it stopping. It was a realm that the human race had never reached. However, everything came to an abrupt end. At that crucial moment, which might affect the future of the entire human race, Lu Chen suddenly made a move. With the ruthlessness and cruelty of a shadow, he personally destroyed the god subjugation spell formation, turning the four incomparably powerful but also incomparably fragile people into smoke and dust at the same time. However, today, perfected Lord Tianlan didn't seem excited at all. He didn't seem to be envious of the possible increase in power. He just looked up at the sky with an indifferent expression, as if waiting for something. When the sea of blood covered the sky, the blood moon was an exceptionally eye-catching existence when it rose into the sky. However, when the underground formation was activated and a huge dark vortex appeared in the sky, the blood moon looked like an ornament in the vortex. However, the endless blood essence that was absorbed from all directions had gradually gathered on the blood moon in the sky. Gradually, the blood moon also seemed to expand. Its color turned from dark red to deep red, and gradually became so thick that it looked like it was about to drip blood. Suddenly, there was a thunderclap in the sky. The light of the blood moon shone on the branches of the divine tree and suddenly dispersed. It was like a signal, but also like a critical point had been reached, and a rope that had long been stretched taut was instantly torn. The world suddenly darkened for a moment. A faint wind blew from the horizon. The giant eyes were deep, staring coldly at the human world. Darkness swept up from the ground and broke through all the shackles. The originally bright ball of light was instantly dispersed, turning into countless scattered light spots. The light spots fell on the vast land, then extinguished and disappeared. The door of darkness opened, and ghostly wails and wolf howls rang out. The deepest and densest darkness flew out from the depths of the ground, mixed with the eyes of countless ghostly shadows, laughing and howling. At a glance, there were probably tens of thousands of demonic ghosts. It was like a crazy banquet. In this underground cave, there were 4 people standing in midair. Their bodies of flesh and blood immediately attracted a large group of demonic ghosts of all shapes and sizes in the darkness. They seemed to have reached an extreme level of thirst for flesh and blood, and all of them were howling madly as if they had gone mad. However, these people were perfected lords of the divine transformation realm after all, and it was not that easy to get close to them. Perfected Lord Steelpot and Perfected Lord Guangbo both had a slight change of expression on their faces. Then, their bodies trembled, and different Dharma treasures flew out of their bodies. One turned into a halo, and the other turned into a round shield. They protected themselves in the middle, and the demonic ghosts actually could not get close to them for a while. Seeing this, Lu Chen was subconsciously thinking about how to deal with it. He even wondered if he should hide in the seed of the divine tree again. However, he quickly eliminated this idea. Although the seed of the divine tree was mysterious, the three people present were perfected lords of the divine transformation realm. Lu Chen had no confidence that he could hide it from them. If he acted rashly, he might expose the secret of the seed of the divine tree. Just as he was feeling anxious, Lu Chen suddenly realized that the dark demonic ghosts that filled the sky were howling and howling, but for some reason, none of them approached him. No, to be exact, perfected Lord Tianlan had unknowingly retreated a distance and came to Lu Chen's side. Then, the demonic ghosts that seemed to want to devour all flesh and blood in the world actually ignored the two of them. They just flew around perfected Lord Steelpot and perfected Lord Guangbo crazily and attacked them with all their might. Lu Chen was stunned, and then he turned to look at perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to have sensed his gaze and also turned to look at him. His expression was still calm, and he even smiled at Lu Chen. Chapter 705. Sometimes, Lu Chen felt that he didn't understand perfected Lord Tianlan at all, even though from a certain point of view, he was the closest person to perfected Lord Tianlan in this world. The life of this bald big shot, a demigod true monarch, to be exact, the first half of his life had always been very mysterious. When he appeared in the eyes of the world and the human cultivation world, he was already the second disciple of the world's top big shot, Master Tianhong. Then, very quickly, he stepped into the demigod realm that countless people dreamed of, making Master Tianhong the first person in history to teach two demigod true monarchs. When true Lord Tianlan became famous and started to conquer the world, he was the youngest true lord of the spirit severing stage. However, almost no one knew of his experiences before that. The only thing the world knew about his identity was that he was the disciple of Master Tianhong. As for where he was born, where his parents were, family relations, and even his surname, no one knew. Perfected Lord Tianlan was very secretive about his past, and after he gained power and status, no one dared to ask about these things at the risk of offending him, even though this bald perfected lord had never publicly said or expressed that he wasn't allowed to ask about his past. Lu Chen had been raised by perfected Lord Tianlan from a young age. Practically everything he had was given to him by this man. Even the path of his life was largely influenced by perfected Lord Tianlan's choices. He walked the most difficult path, and it wasn't one that he liked, but there was no medicine for regret in this world. And Lu Chen's feelings towards perfected Lord Tianlan were probably the most complicated. Respect, worship, and admiration? Hatred, disgust, and wariness? These feelings seemed to be completely opposite, but they were always mixed up in Lu Chen's heart at different times. So, even though he could feel that perfected Lord Tianlan might value him the most in this world, he didn't dare to say that he completely understood this person. If one did not understand him, one would not be able to predict perfected Lord Tianlan's emotions and actions, and one would not be able to guess what he would do next. Sometimes, it was really hard for Lu Chen not to see this damned baldy as a lunatic, especially when he saw the scene in front of him. The sky was falling, the earth was splitting, and the blood moon was hanging high in the sky. It was a scene of doomsday. And all of this was caused by the person in front of him. He had said that he was doing this for the betterment of the world. He was doing this for the sake of the common people. He had said that Xianxia had long been rotten, and if it was not rectified, it would become the second devil cult in the future. Moreover, with the power and influence of this huge organization, the degree of harm would be 1,000 times more than the devil cult. He had also said that almost everyone in the world was stupid, like ants. They didn't have the ability to make the final decision, so he had to decide everything himself. Lu Chen knew that Tianlan actually didn't often say these words to others, so he didn't want to explain anything to himself. Perhaps such an unruly and arrogant person like him probably didn't care to explain anything to others. It was very likely that he only said these words to Lu Chen. Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't need the understanding of the world, but at some occasional moment, he probably still hoped that the young man he valued and hoped to inherit his foundation in the future would have some understanding in his heart. Lu Chen asked himself, Do you understand? Do you understand? The answer was no. He used to be the most outstanding and terrifying shadow in the world. He lurked in the most dangerous environment for 10 years and finally destroyed the biggest dream of the devil cult. Such a person would definitely be exceptionally calm and have an unwavering will. This was something that perfected Lord Tianlan had personally nurtured when he was young. However, many years later, when his mind had completely matured, even perfected Lord Tianlan could no longer easily shake his mind. His thought was, what this damn baldy said sounds nice, but it's all bullshit. Since he saw the world as ants, how could he really care about the life and death of the world? It didn't make sense to say that he was thinking about the world. Lu Chen couldn't understand why they thought that the perfected immortal alliance had too many flaws and that they had to be destroyed completely. They even went as far as to create such a huge ruckus and not care if the heavens fell and the earth cracked and the end of the world arrived. From Lu Chen's point of view, everything made him think that the damn baldy had most likely gone mad. Have you ever seen the smile of a madman? Against the backdrop of this apocalyptic calamity, his large sleeves fluttered as he stood in midair. His body was as burly as ever, his back was straight, and his aura was vigorous. Even his smile was as gentle as usual, as if none of this had anything to do with him. Lu Chen felt a little cold in his heart. Looking at the terrifying demon ghosts around them, who didn't seem to have any intention of approaching them, Lu Chen felt a chill all over his body. Then he smiled at perfected Lord Tianlan as well. His smile was peaceful and calm, just like how he usually did. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded, seemingly satisfied. He patted Lu Chen's shoulder and said gently, "Not bad. You can still be so calm in the face of such a situation. Just this mentality alone is better than those two good-for-nothings." Lu Chen glanced at the two supremes, Tai Hu and Guang Bo, who were besieged by countless dark demonic ghosts. His facial expression did not change as he nodded. Perfected Lord Tianlan wanted to say something more, but suddenly made a sound of surprise and turned to look to the side. Lu Chen also felt something and followed his gaze. Then, his expression changed slightly. On the ground, a figure suddenly appeared from the cracks in the ruins. Then, with a few flashes, his movements were agile and elegant. Along the way, although many demon ghosts noticed him and pounced over, they were all dodged by that person and he quickly flew over. That person was perfected Lord Guyu, who had been hiding at the side and presiding over the array. Now, it seemed that he had been forced to show himself by the demon ghosts that suddenly appeared. But the strange thing was that perfected Lord Guyu was not alone. Unknowingly, he was carrying another black animal in his hand. It was a strong black dog, Atsu. Atsu was already very tall and sturdy, almost stronger than an adult. But in perfected Lord Guyu's hand, this black dog was unusually obedient and did not move at all. Just like that, perfected Lord Guyu carried it as if it was weightless, avoiding all kinds of dangers along the way. Then, it flew to perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen, and with a leap, flew up. Seeing Lu Chen and perfected Lord Tianlan standing there, Atsu was instantly excited and roared at Lu Chen. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched, but he did not say anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan, who was at the side, also did not seem to see this scene. He looked at perfected Lord Guyu and said with a smile, "You're here." Perfected Lord Guyu's expression was calm. After approaching perfected Lord Tianlan, the demon ghosts did not chase after him. He stared at perfected Lord Tianlan and after a while, he said indifferently, "I didn't expect that you would even deceive me." Chapter 706. True Lord Guyu's words were simple and profound. It was not obvious, but upon careful thought, it sent chills down one's spine. Apart from true Lord Tianlan and true Lord Guyu himself, the other three were not lacking in intelligence. Lu Chen stood the closest and heard it the most clearly. He was startled at first, then his expression changed slightly and he could not help but look at true Lord Tianlan. Slightly further away, the other two divine transformation stage perfected lords were besieged by the sudden appearance of the ferocious and terrifying dark demonic ghosts. Their profound cultivation and sharp hearing allowed them to ignore such a distance, so they naturally heard true Lord Guyu's words. From this, it could be seen that true Lord Guyu did not have any intention of hiding anything. Even though he seemed to have some secrets with true Lord Tianlan, at this point, he seemed to have chosen to directly open the lid. Guyu. Brother Guyu? Two cries of anger, shock, and other complicated emotions came from the other side. Obviously, Tai Hu and Guangbo were greatly surprised by true Lord Guyu's current behavior. The only difference was that true Lord Tai Hu seemed to be filled with righteous indignation, while true Lord Guangbo was still trying to salvage something. True Lord Guyu did not look at the two comrades who were on the same side not long ago. He only stared at true Lord Tianlan with his brows tightly furrowed. His face revealed some doubt and confusion. In his eyes, there was no fear or panic, nor was there any anger from being deceived. He seemed to be more concerned about something else. Why are you doing this, Brother Tianlan? True Lord Guyu asked true Lord Tianlan. I don't understand why you are doing this. True Lord Tianlan stood there calmly and only waved his hand slightly. Then he looked at him with interest and smiled. Looks like you are not afraid of death? True Lord Guyu shook his head and said, I have lived long enough and seen enough things. Life is also a little boring. Although I will not actively seek death, there is nothing to be afraid of if death really comes. It's just that I don't understand. He looked at perfected Lord Tianlan and said, Why are you doing this? The entire Xianxia, and even the entire world, now respects you. As long as you use some tricks, ruling over the world will be a piece of cake. You're still doing such a thing at this point? He pointed at the huge dark vortex in the sky and the door of darkness that was constantly spewing out dark demonic ghosts and howling ghosts. With a grave expression, he said, This world was originally yours, but you want to destroy it. Yes, that's right. Lu Chen, who was standing beside perfected Lord Tianlan, almost wanted to clap for perfected Lord Guyu. Those words had really hit the nail on the head. It was the thing that had puzzled him the most during this period of time. It seemed like the entire world was about to fall into the hands of this damned Baldy. Even if there were a few divine transformation perfected lords who resisted stubbornly, but with perfected Lord Tianlan's strength, Lu Chen completely believed that he would be the final victor. To be honest, in Lu Chen's heart, it didn't matter what kind of weird things perfected Lord Tianlan did. Even if he slaughtered all living beings in a frenzy and caused rivers of blood to flow, even if he brought disaster to the world and tormented all living beings, it was a different matter whether he was right or wrong. However, these things could barely be considered as the behavior of a tyrant, which was within the scope of a single person. However, perfected Lord Tianlan's current actions seemed to be bent on destroying this world. This was difficult to understand. The entire world was clearly yours. Perfected Lord Tianlan probably didn't expect perfected Lord Guyu to ask him this question so directly. Moreover, the person who was holding a black dog in his hand and looked calm and indifferent, as if he didn't care about life and death at all, seemed to have touched his state of mind. In this world, there weren't many people or things that could even touch him. That was why he remained silent for a moment, and then unexpectedly spoke a few more words, saying, Even though this world is mine, I can already see that this place is rotten from start to finish. It is rotten. I must destroy it and start over again. Perfected Lord Guyu immediately shook his head, looking like he couldn't accept perfected Lord Tianlan's answer at all. He said in a deep voice, No, this doesn't make sense. Moreover, with your talent, as long as you can control the power of Xianxia, it's not impossible for you to rebuild the culture of the cultivation world. What can't you do? Instead, you want to break everything and start anew? This is a logic that even a 3-year-old knows. At the end of his sentence, he looked a little excited. Lu Chen glanced sideways at perfected Lord Tianlan, only to see that he had maintained a smile from start to finish. Perfected Lord Guyu's question didn't seem to affect him at all. In the end, he only smiled and said, You don't understand. Then, he suddenly turned his head and smiled at Lu Chen. He then said softly, A person's heart can't be changed then? He raised his hand and made a cutting gesture. Ridiculous. Perfected Lord Guyu immediately said loudly, Even if you're crazy and don't want to live anymore and want to perish together with this world, what about your disciple? He's still so young and has a bright future ahead of him. Do you want him to die with you by doing such a dangerous thing? As soon as he said this, the cave seemed to suddenly fall silent for a moment, including the other two soul formation perfected lords who were roaring furiously in the distance. Perfected Lord Tianlan squinted his eyes and looked at Guyu, but he didn't turn back to look at Lu Chen. Meanwhile, Lu Chen's expression didn't change at all as he looked at Perfected Lord Guyu. However, he laughed bitterly in his heart and was speechless for a moment. After a while, Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Perfected Lord Guyu and said, "Are you trying to sow discord between us?" Perfected Lord Guyu said frankly, "I'm just speaking the truth." With that, he turned his head and waved at Lu Chen. "Junior nephew Lu Chen, come over here. This black dog is yours, right? I saved it in passing. I know you're kind-hearted and love living beings the most. No matter what, this dog is a living being's life. Bring it back." With that, he casually tossed the huge Atsu towards Lu Chen like a small stone. Perfected Lord Tianlan stood still with a calm expression and no one could tell what he was thinking. Lu Chen stood beside him and also looked at Atsu that was flying over. His expression didn't change, but the corner of his eyes twitched slightly. Is this dog going to catch it or not? If he caught it, will this damn baldy beside him suddenly go crazy and do something? Perfected Lord Guyu looked like a dignified person, but he was clearly full of evil tricks. The moment he saw that the situation wasn't right, he immediately thought of ways to sow discord between the opponent and him. His scheming was clearly much better than the other two useless soul formation cultivators. The black dog danced in the air and arrived before them in the blink of an eye. Poof! There was a dull thud. At that moment, Lu Chen finally reached out and caught Atsu in his arms. Perfected Lord Guyu, who was far away, squinted his eyes and looked over. Lu Chen rubbed Atsu's head silently. Perfected Lord Tianlan beside him turned around slowly and looked deeply at Lu Chen. Chapter 707. Atsu seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. It lay in Lu Chen's arms obediently and did not move at all. Its body now looked even bigger than Lu Chen's, so the situation was a little comical. However, no one laughed. Perfected Guyu looked over with a smile. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen with a solemn expression. Lu Chen did not look at anyone and only lowered his head to pat Atsu's head. After a while, he raised his head and looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze met with Lu Chen's. The atmosphere seemed to be a little strange, but Lu Chen had no intention of backing down. Instead, he looked at him calmly. Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly smiled and said, "You don't seem to be too afraid of me?" Lu Chen asked in return, "Do you want someone who is afraid of you?" "That's not it." Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, "There are countless people in the world who are afraid of me. What's there to be afraid of? It's good for you to be like this." Lu Chen responded and did not say anything else. On the other side, Perfected Guyu's face darkened and looked a little ugly. Perfected Lord Tianlan turned to look at him and said with a smile, "What's wrong? Are you disappointed that I, a lunatic, did not go completely crazy and did not even massacre the people around me?" Perfected Guyu said, "He's just a junior. What can he do? I'm just telling the truth. Besides, with your current strength, 1 or 2 disciples won't be of much help. It doesn't matter whether you want them or not." Lu Chen frowned slightly while Perfected Lord Tianlan narrowed his eyes. After a rare moment of silence, he said, "If you insist on saying that, it doesn't seem to be completely unreasonable. However," Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "No one in the world can control what I want to do. Lu Chen is my disciple. I trust him. It's good to bring him along." Finishing his words, he seemed to be too lazy to waste his breath on Guyu True Monarch. With a wave of his sleeve, the tree's leaves on the tree swayed, and suddenly, a green light shone brightly, emitting thousands of rays of light. In an instant, unimaginably abundant life essence soared into the sky and filled the world. As if it was stimulated by this life essence, the huge eye in the huge vortex in the sky suddenly widened and looked down. At that moment, even the light of the blood moon seemed to become insignificant in front of this giant eye. Suddenly, several strange auras descended from the sky. They were invisible and colorless, but they were extremely fast and accurately located the few soul formation perfected cultivators in the cave. Yes, it was only those 4 deity transformation stage perfected monarchs. The others, such as Lu Qin, did not feel anything at all. However, this was not the first time that Lu Qin had seen a similar scene. Almost at the same time, he recalled the scene of the god-subduing mantra. The majestic divine power in the sky finally descended once more. What was going to happen this time? The senses of soul formation perfected monarchs were the sharpest in the world. Although they were currently trapped in the endless ambush of the dark demonic ghosts and could not escape, perfected monarch Steel Pot, perfected monarch Guangbo, and even perfected monarch Guyu, who was not in trouble yet, all changed their expressions at the same time and looked up at the sky. The feeling of being stared at by an unknown but incomparably terrifying existence was not a good one. Not to mention that they had been at the peak of the human race for a long time and were used to looking down on the world. At this moment, they suddenly felt that something far stronger than them was staring at them. The sense of loss, fear, and even helplessness was extremely obvious. Perfected Monarch Tianlon was undoubtedly a soul formation perfected monarch, and the most powerful one among the 4. The aura that descended from the sky was also the strongest when it targeted him. However, his reaction was completely different from the other 3. Without any hint of bewilderment or surprise, he suddenly descended and happened to land in the small pavilion that had already turned into ruins. He stood on the stone slab where the Kunlun seal was, which was still intact. Then, he did something that an ordinary soul formation perfected monarch would never do. He retracted his entire body and lay on the stone slab like a tortoise. A moment later, the Kunlun seal suddenly shone with a golden light and formed a light shield that covered perfected monarch Tianlon, who was curled up into a ball within it. To be honest, when Steel Pot, Guangbo, and Guyu faced perfected monarch Tianlon, they would not be too surprised even if he displayed any earth-shattering divine powers, strange tricks, or unimaginable schemes. This was because in their hearts, they already had an extremely high opinion of this person. However, to be honest, they did not expect that this damn baldy could actually throw away his pride in an instant and do such an embarrassing thing. For a moment, everyone was startled. However, the effect was immediately apparent. The aura in the sky that was originally targeting perfected monarch Tianlon suddenly seemed to have lost its target. It paused in midair for a moment, rotated and shifted for a while, and then quietly dispersed. As for the other 3 auras, they accurately descended on the heads of Steel Pot, Guangbo, and Guyu. Boom! A sudden clap of thunder resounded in the sky. At that moment, time seemed to intersect in front of Lu Chen's eyes. A brilliant ray of light descended from the sky, carrying with it a magnificent yet everlasting Sanskrit song, and directly fell on the heads of the 3 soul formation perfected monarchs. The dark demonic ghosts surrounding the 2 soul formation perfected monarchs, Steel Pot and Guangbo, exploded. Apart from sharp screams, the demonic ghosts that were burnt to death by this dazzling pillar of light instantly evaporated into smoke. For a moment, the darkness retreated and frantically fled backward like a tide. As for the 3 soul formation perfected monarchs, after their initial fear, they still wanted to resist. However, their bodies trembled violently and then stiffened. Terrifying power continuously descended from the sky. They had long cultivated to the peak of the human race and had not been able to advance any further for many years. All of a sudden, it was as if they had broken through that impenetrable barrier and began to frantically increase their strength. Suddenly, they seemed to have seen the dawn that they had been searching for in the darkness for many years. They saw the light on the other side. The auras of these 3 people began to increase crazily. This scene was so familiar that it was the second time in Lu Chen's life that he had seen it. He stared blankly at this scene. His heart was filled with mixed feelings. Then, as if remembering something, he lowered his head and looked down. In the ruins underground, the damned Baldy, who had suddenly abandoned his meaningless pride and hid in the radiance of the Kunlun seal to avoid this calamity, stood up at this moment. He even raised his head and smiled at Lu Chen in the sky. He waved his hand and asked in a loud voice, What do you think of this move of mine? Lu Chen slowly descended with Atsu in his arms. He looked at him with a complicated expression. After a while, he nodded and said sincerely, "In this world, no one is crazier and stronger than you." Perfected Lord Tianlong laughed heartily and was in high spirits. Chapter 708. Lu Chen looked at true Lord Tianlong, who was laughing to the sky, did not say anything more. His eyes then looked at the three deity stage perfected cultivators. The three of them were originally people with shocking cultivation, but right now they were trapped by the light pillar that descended from the sky. Although it was obvious that they were struggling, but it was obvious that there was a force stronger than them that firmly imprisoned them, and they could not break free. Lu Chen had seen a similar scene before, many years ago in the desolate valley, but the situation at that time was different from now. First of all, the three evil sect elders and the fire shaman of the barbarian tribe all actively guided the power falling from the sky into their bodies, and used it to forcibly raise their cultivation level. Lu Chen did not know what the final result of this deity subduing incantation would be, but at least before he attacked those evil sect elders, under the support of this strange and powerful foreign power, those evil sect elders and fire shaman did indeed do something that the human race could not do for thousands of years, forcibly raising their cultivation level in a short period of time, breaking through to deity stage, and at that time they were still rising. Of course, everything that happened next was completely destroyed by the young man in black's tough and ferocious blade. The fire shaman was killed, and the devil cult's vitality was greatly damaged. They had struggled all the way until now, but finally, they could not withstand the heavy pressure of the true immortal alliance and collapsed. Lu Chen slightly shook his head, threw those things out of his mind, and once again stared at those three people. Sure enough, he very quickly felt that the aura of these three deity stage perfected cultivators was rapidly changing. They were constantly raising their strength, rushing towards the unknown realm that was higher than deity stage. The unknown dark place that no human race could reach in history. And in this process, their whole body was numb, just like those evil sect elders, completely unable to move, like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. It was really an ironic scene. Their dream of advancing further in cultivation had suddenly come true, but each of them wanted nothing more than to end this situation immediately. True Lord Tianlong had already walked over. He had regained his composure and elegance. His sleeves fluttered as he walked in the middle of the three thick light pillars, looking at his three old foes with a smile. Even though he was calm and collected, he was still very pleased with himself for taking care of these three enemies in one go. He turned to Lu Chen and said with a smile, "Say, if we wait until the end and let this formation continue, what do you think will happen to them?" In Lu Chen's mind, the four despairing figures in the barren valley who had their bodies smashed to pieces by the strong light beam years ago flashed across his mind. After a moment of silence, he said, "This power is so strong. Even a deity transformation stage perfected cultivator might not be able to hold on until the end." Perfected Lord Tianlong burst into laughter and nodded slightly. "You have a good eye." Lu Chen withdrew his gaze from the three trapped perfected sovereigns of the divine transformation realm. He first glanced at the giant eye in the sky, which seemed to contain an unimaginably violent storm. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and casually glanced at a distant corner of this underground cave out of the corner of his eye. White Lotus felt her legs go soft. Sitting on the ground, she seemed to have lost all her strength and couldn't even stand up. In the period of time that had just passed, she had witnessed with her own eyes a scene that had never been seen before in this world, and she couldn't even imagine. The sky fell and the earth cracked. There was a terrifying giant eye above and an infinite number of demons and ghosts below. Each of them was enough to destroy the world, but they all appeared at the same time. In fact, White Lotus could already be considered an anomaly among girls of her age. Because of the secret cultivation method and experience, she was far more courageous than her peers. But after seeing this scene, she still couldn't help but feel afraid. This kind of fear even made her feel strange. She thought that even if she was shocked, she should still be able to remain calm, but she found that her breathing was nervous and rapid, and cold sweat was seeping out of her forehead. She was completely frightened. White Lotus panted heavily and struggled to sit up. She leaned against the wall, her body trembling nonstop. Finally, she forced herself to calm down. Then, she found that this kind of fear was very strange. It seemed to come from the depths of her heart, an instinctive fear. What was she afraid of? At this moment, suddenly, a sound came from the entrance of the cave. White Lotus's body shook and she suddenly looked back. She saw a ball of darkness faintly appear at the entrance of the cave. Then, 2 balls of green light appeared from the dark fog. It was as if there was a pair of eyes staring at her. That dark aura was the same as the door of darkness in the distance. And that strange figure seemed to be one of the millions of demons and ghosts. White Lotus's face paled. Her body shrank back, but she found that there was a wall behind her. There was no way for her to retreat. The demon ghost in the darkness still had more than half of its body hidden in the dark fog. She couldn't see it clearly, but it seemed to be hanging upside down above the entrance of the cave. Then, it poked its head in and saw White Lotus. Because of this, White Lotus also saw the demon ghost's face. It had a protruding mouth and the cheeks of an ape. It looked like a monkey, but its mouth was very big. When it opened and closed, it revealed at least 100 sharp, disorderly, and dense teeth. It was like a terrifying saw that was ready to tear flesh at any moment. White Lotus's heart skipped a beat. The demon ghost had obviously noticed this living human. After observing for a while, it suddenly opened its bloody mouth and roared angrily. Hiss! This sharp sound was like an awl piercing into White Lotus's ears. Then, the demon ghost suddenly fell down and flew in the air, pouncing towards White Lotus. White Lotus's beautiful face paled, but she did not know why her body was powerless to resist. Just as she was about to mysteriously die in this dark cave, her body suddenly trembled. In that instant, the expression in her eyes suddenly changed. A blank, or perhaps indifferent gaze, shone from the depths of her eyes. Squeak, squeak. The sharp claws in the dark fog had already arrived in front of the young girl. But at this critical moment, the demon ghost suddenly stopped. In the darkness, the pair of green eyes suddenly had a trace of doubt. The demon ghost retracted its body and slowly descended, landing in front of White Lotus. It looked at White Lotus as if it had found something familiar and puzzled. After looking at her for a while, it even leaned forward and made a sniffing action. White Lotus didn't move. She looked at the demon ghost expressionlessly. The fear that she had not long ago had already disappeared, leaving only indifference. The demon ghost seemed to have finally confirmed something. It took 2 steps back and then nodded to White Lotus. Then, with a long roar, it directly turned around and flew out, rushing towards the door of darkness in the distance. White Lotus slowly turned her head, her gaze deep, staring at the dark door deep underground. Then, she stood up and walked in that direction. Chapter 709. Perhaps affected by the terrifying power of the extraterrestrial domain represented by the giant eye in the sky, the beam of light that contained an almost unparalleled power fell from the sky and directly trapped the 3 perfected lords of the divine transformation realm, who represented the most powerful human race. The originally arrogant dark demonic ghosts seemed to have been suppressed in terms of momentum. Originally, countless demonic ghosts had taken advantage of the dark fog to surround Tai Hu and Guang Bo, the 2 perfected lords of the divine transformation realm. However, after the beam of light fell from the sky, the fog of demonic ghosts nearby immediately dissipated without a trace, like snow meeting the scorching sun. The other demonic ghosts screamed and retreated, obviously very afraid of the beam of light. Even so, the underground cave was still filled with ferocious demonic ghosts that flew out from the depths of the earth. They hovered in the air and screamed, their eyes wide open like the wisps, searching for flesh and blood in all directions. However, the strange thing was that these demonic ghosts seemed to be restrained by something. First, none of them left the underground cave, even though there was such a huge hole in the top of their heads. Second, they seemed to treat perfected Lord Tianlan with special respect and did not rush over to attack him like they did to other people. Of course, Lu Chen did not know the reason behind this, but he thought that it was most likely some kind of magic that perfected Lord Tianlan had arranged himself. No matter what it was, perfected Lord Tianlan was really powerful to be able to affect these extremely powerful demonic ghosts that had not appeared for thousands of years. However, if he was not powerful, this scene of doomsday would not have happened. After all, everything here seemed to be caused by perfected Lord Tianlan. Even if he was a lunatic, he was a rare genius lunatic with extraordinary means. However, it would be best if there were fewer lunatics like him, or if there were no more of them, and if they disappeared from the world. The current situation was extremely delicate and dangerous. Although, due to perfected Lord Tianlan's mysterious means, neither the giant eye in the sky nor the door of darkness in the depths of the earth showed any hostility towards perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen did not feel relaxed at all. On the contrary, the pressure in his heart was increasing. If a person stood beside an abyss, even if his feet were on solid ground, he would still be terrified. Not to mention the scene in front of him, if he didn't take into account the sudden appearance of the door of darkness and the demonic ghost, it was like the reappearance of the god-vanquishing spell formation from the Battle of the Desolate Valley. But what was different now was that Lu Chen had lost his biggest and most important initiative. Before him, perfected Lord Tianlan was free and unrestrained, as though everything was under his control. Even if Lu Chen wanted to stop the apocalypse like he did back then, he would not be able to get past perfected Lord Tianlan. Furthermore, perfected Lord Tianlan trusted him so much and favored him so much. Was this kindness really worthless? Could he really stab the sharp blade into Tianlan's back like what he did to the elder of the devil cult? Just as Lu Chen's expression was normal but his heart was in turmoil, the situation in the underground cave suddenly changed. The dark demonic ghosts flying all over the sky suddenly let out an earth-shattering howl, and then with a series of poochie, poochie sounds, countless demonic ghosts turned into a huge dark torrent, circled around in the cave, and suddenly rushed back to the door of darkness. A roar sounded from the depths of the earth. Both Lu Chen and perfected Lord Tianlan looked in that direction and saw that in the depths of the door of darkness, there was a place where the darkness suddenly became 1,000 times thicker, as though it was real. Then, the incomparably deep darkness slowly rose and peeped out of the door of darkness. For some reason, although Lu Chen did not understand what it was, nor did he understand what was in the door of darkness, he vaguely felt that although the strange darkness that just appeared was ferocious and terrifying, its movements seemed to be a bit cautious. It seemed to be worried about something and was carefully looking around, but it was obvious that it ignored all the humans in the cave, even the perfected lords of the divine transformation realm. It did not even pay much attention to the giant eye in the sky and the inexplicable darkness. It just looked around and carefully clung to the edge of the door of darkness, as though it would immediately shrink back if anything disturbed it. Lu Chen thought that his eyes might be playing tricks on him, or his mind was a little confused, so he had an inexplicable illusion. How could something that could ignore the power of the perfected lords of the divine transformation realm and even the giant eye in the sky be afraid of it in this world? Reality seemed to prove his conjecture. The strange darkness undulated a few times at the edge of the door of darkness, and as though there was really nothing to be afraid of, it boldly slid out. At the same time, the flood of demonic ghosts that filled the sky also flew back, and the two actually did not have any intention of dodging, and just like that, they directly collided with each other, dumbfounded. The earth-shattering sound that he imagined did not happen, but there was a much quieter whistling sound of the wind. After the flood of demonic ghosts that filled the sky encountered the thick darkness, they directly stuck to it. Countless demonic ghosts, like rivers returning to the sea, all stuck to the darkness, and then like stickers on the surface, they began to assemble from head to toe. This scene was truly inconceivable, but anything unexpected happening here wouldn't surprise Lu Chen any more than it already was. He frowned and looked at everything in the door of darkness that was surging violently, constantly expanding, and then, in the surging darkness, gradually formed a huge black shadow, turning into a huge body. Then, it took the first step in this world. Boom! A stream of blazing magma suddenly spewed out from the foot of the darkness, and a low but soul-shaking roar came from the darkness. The light from the horizon sprinkled down, illuminating the huge body. It was a dragon. It was a dragon in the darkness. Lu Chen's eyes suddenly widened. Although he already felt that there was nothing more to be surprised about at this moment, when he saw the dragon that stepped out of the darkness, he still opened his mouth wide, and his mind went blank for a moment. This dragon actually looked very familiar to him, as though he had seen it somewhere before. In fact, there was only one answer to this memory, because in this world he had only seen one dragon. He subconsciously lowered his head and glanced at the Kunlun seal on the stone slab under perfected Lord Tianlan's feet. In his memory, that black dragon had once been hiding in there. And now, what about this dragon? It was so similar to the black dragon. So what was its origin and identity? Also, where was that black dragon? Why hadn't he seen it after all the commotion? Suddenly, Lu Chen's pupils shrank slightly. At this moment, he saw that perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to inadvertently take a step to the side, moving his body away from the Kunlun seal. Chapter 710. There was nothing more bizarre in the world than today. All sorts of strange scenes emerged one after another, dazzling one's eyes, and even the shock and horror gradually became numb. The body of the dragon that walked out of the door of darkness was abnormally huge, and the surface of its body was covered in demonic ghosts. It was as if it was wearing a layer of armor, and there were countless bloody mouths on the armor that opened and closed automatically, intending to devour all living beings. After the dark dragon walked out of the door of darkness, it seemed to look around and notice the changes in the outside world. However, it didn't seem to be too interested in the few soul formation stage perfected lords of the human race. Instead, it looked up into the sky. The first thing it did was to look for the blood moon. Then, it discovered that the light of the blood moon had gradually dimmed and was trapped in the huge dark vortex in the sky, showing signs of being devoured. The dark dragon lifted its head abruptly and roared at the gigantic eye in the sky. The thunderous roar caused the winds and clouds to roll, and the sky to change color. The entire dark vortex in the sky churned, and countless dark clouds trembled and swayed violently as though they sensed a terrifying aura. The gigantic eye also looked over with a cold and indifferent gaze. It looked at the dragon just like how it looked at the other creatures on the ground. However, this obvious provocation clearly offended the gigantic eye. A strong beam of light shot out from the gigantic eye in the sky and landed directly on the dark dragon. The dark dragon didn't back down at all. It raised its head and widened its mouth. In a thunderous roar, a stream of magma-like flames spurted out of its mouth, blocking the dazzling light beam in midair. The raging flames and the pillar of light that descended from the sky collided in midair. In an instant, an invisible and substantial wave of air took the shape of a ring and surged out in all directions. Then, it fiercely collided with the stone walls of the underground stone cave, causing countless cracks to fall from the rubble. After a while, the beam of light dissipated and the dragon flames were retracted. The dark dragon shook its head and wagged its tail ferociously as it walked forward step by step. With every step it took, the ground beneath its feet cracked and flowed, as if it was in the netherworld. It was also shocking that two inexplicably powerful forces suddenly clashed. However, Lu Chen looked at perfected Lord Tianlan's calm expression and couldn't help but wonder if this was also arranged by him. Although many of the things that happened here seemed to be beyond the limits of human capabilities, this damn Baldy was getting crazier and crazier. Who knew what he would do next? Just as Lu Chen was thinking about it, all of a sudden he saw a familiar figure walking over from afar through the chaotic scene of magma spewing out from the ground, as well as all kinds of black gas, black fog and remnant-like beams. It was none other than White Lotus. Lu Chen was taken aback. He looked over and realized that White Lotus's expression didn't seem right. As she walked on the ground, scorching magma and all kinds of incomparably dangerous situations could be seen all around her. However, White Lotus seemed to turn a blind eye to them. She didn't even look at the ground as she walked forward in a daze, heading towards the dark portal. What was strange was that White Lotus's seemingly casual footsteps actually coincidentally avoided all the dangerous places. Roar! A low growl came from Lu Chen's side. It was Atu barking softly. The emotions contained in that sound were a little complicated and strange, as if this dog also had some indescribable feelings towards the young girl. Lu Chen glanced at Atsu and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Then, as though he suddenly sensed something, he looked back and saw that perfected Lord Tianlan had also turned to look at them. His eyes swept over them and then looked at White Lotus. Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat, but his expression didn't change at all. He said, "That's White Lotus." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "That's right." Lu Chen waited for a while. Seeing that perfected Lord Tianlan didn't say anything else, he asked, "What do you want me to do? Go down and stop her?" Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment and then said indifferently, "No need. Let her be." Oh. Lu Chen agreed. He thought that at his level he probably didn't care about a girl like White Lotus. However, no matter what, White Lotus had walked this path on her own and he couldn't stop her. Therefore, Lu Chen quickly hardened his heart and stood behind perfected Lord Tianlan again. After pondering for a moment, he asked in a deep voice, "What should we do now?" Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed a little surprised. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Why? You don't seem to be afraid of this situation? Also, what do you think we can do when our strength is so much weaker than theirs?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I don't know. I'm your disciple. Although I feel that the situation is a little out of control, I just want to ask you if there's anything I can do." Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment and suddenly smiled. He then patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't worry. Everything is under control." He smiled and said, "When the Tree of God is reborn, these two pieces of trash will be nothing more than fertilizer for this world." Lu Chen frowned. He didn't understand Perfected Lord Tianlan's words, but he keenly noticed the few key words that Perfected Lord Tianlan had said. Even someone as calm as Lu Chen couldn't help but feel his heartbeat speed up. After taking a deep breath, he asked in a low voice, "Did you just say, the Tree of God will be reborn?" Perfected Lord Tianlan looked up at the sky. Above his head, the divine tree Dharma treasure that was formed from a branch and two leaves was shining brightly and brimming with vitality. Even though the two terrifying forces in the world were in a stalemate and the world was collapsing, it did not seem to affect the treasure at all. "That's right." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "Everything in front of us is just a trap that I've set up for many years. The divine central continent is a ruin that the Tree of God built and then abandoned. As long as we control the four fragments of this world and use these two pieces of trash from outer space as bait, the Tree of God will naturally return." Lu Chen felt that his brain wasn't enough at this moment. He asked with some difficulty, "Then, what's going to happen next?" After a pause, his expression suddenly changed and he said, "Did you just say, there are 4 fragments of the Tree of God, not 3? Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand with a mysterious smile and said meaningfully, "That's right, 4. Chapter 7:11. Lu Chen shot a glance at White Lotus and noticed that something was wrong with her. She exuded a gloomy aura that was entirely different from the beautiful young lady that he was familiar with. But this matter that might have surprised him and made him investigate immediately didn't seem to stir any waves in his heart now. The world in front of him, all the people here, and even the various messy things in the sky and on the ground, all seemed to be things that he had never heard of before, things that were very wrong. In this situation, Lu Chen witnessed White Lotus behaving abnormally and he had a strange feeling that this was how things should be. Perhaps this world is about to go crazy or be destroyed, which is why it has become like this. At this critical juncture, this strange thought cropped up in Lu Chen's mind. He lowered his head to look at Atsu, thinking that only this black dog seemed to be the same as before. The dark dragon had arrived before Road and true Lord Tianlan. Its height was unimaginably massive as though it occupied the entire underground cave. But of course, that wasn't the case. It was just that the visual impact was too strong, leaving one with a sense of powerlessness and fear. However, This feeling couldn't be seen from true Lord Tianlan or Lu Qin. They didn't seem to have the emotions of ordinary humans. Even in the face of such a terrifying monster, their expressions remained unchanged and they looked at it calmly. The dark dragon didn't pay too much attention to the two ant-like humans. On the contrary, after it scanned the surroundings, it took a second glance at its feet. White Lotus walked to the side of this evil beast that seemed to have broken free from hell. On the surface of the darkness dragon's skin, there were countless ferocious and terrifying demonic ghosts attached to it. When the darkness dragon saw this beautiful girl, thousands of bloody mouths on his leg opened up and roared at the same time. It looked like they were salivating, and it made one's scalp go numb. However, Bai Lian turned a blind eye to them. She did not care about the ghosts at all. She stared straight at the huge dragon of darkness and suddenly raised her arms. She opened her hands and spoke. But what was strange was that even though her mouth moved, no sound came out. Even though she seemed to be chanting some kind of incantation or saying something, no one present could hear her voice. But the dark dragon reacted. It turned around, lowered its head, and gazed at the young lady. All of a sudden, it widened its mouth and spat out a stream of flames on White Lotus. Lu Qin trembled slightly. But shortly after, he realized that things weren't as he imagined. White Lotus didn't turn into ashes in the flames. Instead, she seemed to have opened her arms and embraced the sea of flames with all her might. The dragon flames were scorching and scorching, violently sweeping through the air. Only a sharp whistle could be heard as Bai Lian's clothes were instantly burned to ashes, scattering in all directions. However, in the blazing flames, the young lady's beautiful, fair body was revealed. She was like a pure, flawless jade that rose slowly in the flames. She closed her eyes and was expressionless as though she had turned into an emotionless statue. She flew toward the dark dragon slowly while being surrounded by the flames. In the light of the fire, her body gradually emitted a gem-like luster. In front of her, on the chest of the darkness dragon, the terrifying armor formed by the horde of demonic ghosts suddenly squirmed. The demonic ghost in that area screamed shrilly. Then, a crack appeared. White Lotus was dragged over by the raging flames and fell into that crack. Countless demonic spirits snarled and the skin on the dark dragon's chest began to squirm like waves. Inside was a bottomless darkness, while on the outside were terrifying demonic spirits. They squeezed in from both sides and engulfed White Lotus's clean, flawless body like a tide. White Lotus didn't resist at all. In fact, she didn't even close her eyes. She calmly scanned the world and allowed the terrifying things to engulf her. Shortly after, only her face was exposed while the rest of her body was devoured by the dark dragon's body. Around her face, there were sinister and terrifying demonic spirits. A few demonic ghosts that were close to her even opened their mouths at her. Some roared, some bared their sharp teeth, and some stuck out their scarlet tongues, seemingly with a bit of strange curiosity, and licked her face. White Lotus didn't respond. She stared blankly ahead. Unsure if it was an illusion, Lu Qin felt that she seemed to be looking at him. Atsu growled in a low voice. However, its voice was deep and mixed. For a moment, Lu Qin couldn't tell if it was angry, or any other emotions. He stroked Atsu's head and comforted it. Soon Atsu calmed down. Then, out of the corner of Lu Chen's eye, he saw a ray of golden light shining out from the ground. That ray of golden light wasn't eye-catching, especially under the gigantic body of the demonic spirit. Moreover, there were also the various light pillars from the ritual that shielded them. The ray of light emitted from the Kunlun seal seemed more like a feeble ray of light that was meaningless. The dark dragon didn't notice this tiny change at all. After surprisingly absorbing White Lotus into its body, it lifted its head and let out another roar at the sky. It was apparent that in this world, the dark dragon harbored greater hostility toward the gigantic eye in the sky. It was an indescribable feeling. Lu Qin pondered for a moment and could only say that it was probably like a wild beast that was guarding its territory, which was why it flew into a rage after witnessing its territory being invaded. The dark dragon's brutality and hostility were so obvious that it probably didn't care about any enemies in this world. After repeated provocations, the gigantic eye in the sky finally couldn't hold it in any longer and reacted even more violently. All of a sudden, the enormous, dark vortex spun violently. Lightning bolts filled the entire sky in an instant. The blood moon trembled abruptly and swayed unsteadily. It seemed like it was about to be devoured by the vortex in the violent gales and was slowly being pulled into the depths of the vortex. The dark dragon let out a long roar that reverberated in all directions. As though it was ruthlessly stimulated, it became increasingly violent. It was also at this moment that Lu Chen, who was watching the two terrifying beings in outer space, suddenly heard perfected Lord Tianlan's voice. He laughed and said, "See, I wasn't wrong, right? These two are really useless. They look powerful, but aren't they still fighting on their own?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said and nodded. "It's almost time." You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.